early on in Arya's chapters, her biggest problem is keeping her stitches straight, being less pretty and graceful than Sansa, and Septa Mordain's judgment on all or some of the above. Now, no one calls her a sweet summer child because in the world, that's a pejorative term for naive adults, not for actual children like she is. But comparing those early chapters to later ones is like night and day. Or black and white, eh? Since then, so much has changed. This is a girl who ate worms and didn't bat an eye. And she did it multiple times. Once when it was a wormy apple, didn't bother her at all. And then there was the worm in the skull face of the kindly man. It's hard to imagine this girl was ever afraid of Septa Mordain, right? Like she's come a long way. It hasn't even been that long since Septa Mordain was her guardian, since her death even. But it might feel that way because so much has happened, right? It's hard not to think of Arya as someone a bit older because of all she's been through. But really not that much actual time has passed from the start of the series to where we're at now, about two and a half years. In that time, she's been through a lot. Loss of family. She's been a refugee in the Riverlands during wartime, during the time where some of the worst people in Westeros were unleashed to do their worst upon the Riverlands. And she encountered all of them. Amory Lorch, Gregor Clegane, Vargo Hoat, Roose Bolton, Tywin Lannister. She arrived just in time for the Red Wedding for the worst part. Now, she's killed people as well on her own. And now she's being trained by the best killers in the world to do more of that. These killers are basically a death cult and apparently unaware that she has skills even beyond what they can teach. And by that, of course, I mean skin changing. They might have watched her hide needle, but they don't know she's a warg, or if they do, or if they learn that eventually, that could get interesting. But they want her to be no one. But she is Arya Stark. And Arya Stark has a list of people she wants to kill that, ironically, the death cult won't allow because Arya wants that. No one doesn't want that, right? And she's supposed to be no one, not Arya. They want her to give up the list because that's Arya's list, not a list made by a servant of the many-faced god. So that's at odds. And it's also at odds with what caused her to write the list in the first place, which is a big part of what we'll talk about today. But she calls it a prayer, not a list. And once she comes up with it in A Clash of Kings, fairly early on, the prayer is in almost all of her chapters after that. Sometimes twice. Pretty much the only time it doesn't appear is right after the Red Wedding. She's also kidnapped by someone on that list and is overheard reciting it at the House of Black and White. So it's a huge part of her story. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into that kill list, that prayer, everyone who's on it, whether they're still alive or not, their fates, and we put it in order, chronologically, who might get added later, information she might get that might change her mind on certain people, how it continues to impact her story, her relationship with death, justice, and authority. We've got all that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello, and welcome back, everyone, to an Arya-focused episode. We did Stark Skin Changers last week, had a good bit of Arya in there, and this is going to relate to that episode a little bit. Some of the themes are a little similar, but the focus is quite a bit different in terms of what we're diving deep on. But there's definitely a lot of connection to that one. Of course, with a lot of Arya, there's a big connection to what's coming for her, and those things are very much interwoven. We are here almost every Sunday at 3 Eastern, live streaming. And if you want to catch the episode after the fact, it gets edited and put up on Spotify. It's a little bit of a cleaner version over on Spotify. And there's an audio-only version available on every podcast platform that you can think of. And you can catch that always a week after it's on YouTube. And you can find all of our back catalog there. But if you listen on Patreon, it is ad-free. No ads whatsoever. We even take out our host-read ads, edit those out, so it's a little smoother. You get through it a little faster, and there's no interruptions. You can sign up for that on patreon.com/historyofwesteros. There are spoilers for the Mercy Winds of Winter chapter. We are certainly talking about that one in here. There's even a quote or two from it. So if you're trying to avoid that one, well, it's not going to spoil the whole chapter, but it does spoil the main event of that chapter. I assume most of you have already read it. In fact, we have an audio version of it that was pushed to the front of our feed recently. I highly recommend it. It's got all of us doing voice acting. There's music. It's extremely well produced. The lead playing Arya is excellent, so I think you all would really enjoy it if you haven't listened to it. Or if you have listened to it, listen to it again with this episode in mind. Also, make sure to check out goodqueenally.tumblr.com. Nita, as always, has some great notes in this episode, and you will want to check out her takes over on her blog, where there are just an endless amount of great questions and answers on a variety of topics covering A Song of Ice and Fire. And never the show. Nina doesn't talk about the show. So you know you're going to get high-octane book content only. If you have questions for us, feel free to ask them live or send them over to us at westeroshistory@gmail.com. If you're a patron, you can email us through Patron's email system. And let's get started with our trivia question. At the end, I'll give the answer and a couple episodes that relate to this one. By our count, Arya has killed 8 people. It's a little iffy because of the storming of the holdfast by Amory Lorch's men, and it's a little bit of a montage, and she's knocking people off the wall, stabbing people, this and that. So maybe there's more kills, but that's not important for this question. I just wanted to clarify why we think it's 8. How many names of those 8 people were names on her list? So in other words, how many names has she personally crossed off the list with her own action, with her own blade or her own poison or what have you? It doesn't count when she gives the name to Jaqen. Those don't count. So only killed by her own hand, only took the life personally. How many of those 8 were on the list? You'll be able to get that from listening to the episode if you don't know already, because we're certainly going to go through the details. Here are the different sections we'll be talking about today. We've got the origin of the prayer. We've got the Jaqen of the lamp brings 3 death wishes. We've got the full list, meaning the full Arya's list. Then we've got the ones who were dead on that list and the ones who were alive on that list. And alive is in quotes, mostly thanks to the Cleganes, because, yeah. Then Arya's other kills. We've dedicated a short section to that and just kind of rounded out other people she's killed and the circumstances, some of which will kind of come up between. The prayer and the many-faced god, or perhaps I should call it the prayer versus the many-faced god. As I said during the intro, those two things don't get along very well. That's a developing situation. And then the future of the list. That'll be our final section where we discuss potential adds to the list, maybe a subtraction or two, and the outlook for those particular cases, how they might play out, what Arya may or may not learn about them. Maybe she won't have time to deal with them before someone else does, things like that. So, let's get to it. It's ironic that Ned, in the first chapter, takes the boys to that execution. Because in their world, and this isn't the irony, but in their world, they're supposed to become more accustomed to death. Men are supposed to be the death dealers in their world, right? But it doesn't actually work out that way for the Starks, does it? Arguably, Arya becomes the most intimate with death and killing, if not the most, certainly quite a bit. And Jon might argue, hey, I'm actually dead. I know more about being dead than Arya, or than death than Arya. Okay, fair point, Jon. And Jon and Robb saw more death total because of all the battlefields they've seen, right? All 3 of them, including Arya, have seen countless innocents die. And Robb, frankly, would have caused some as well. Bran lives amidst skulls and veritable ghosts with visions of blood and just dead secrets. So, yeah, he's pretty up close with it too. But Jon and Robb and Bran weren't getting up close and personal with suicides on a daily basis, learning anatomy, dressing corpses and undressing corpses, and all the various ways to end a life, right? Like Jon and Robb and even Bran know the basics, but like the which arteries cause the most bleeding and how to give someone mercy. All these are things she's been taught along the way, and a lot of that came before House of Black and White. A lot of it came in it. So that's what I'm getting at here. Even Sansa has a lot of experience with death by this point, and she's not unnerved by it, right? When the tournament happens, the first tournament, and Sir Hugh of the Vale is killed, Sansa isn't like, oh, Jane Poole is. She has to be taken away. She has to be led away because she's, overcome. But Sansa doesn't really bat an eye at it. She's like, whoa, that was crazy. She's not like, I hate this. No, it was exciting, I suppose. So this is a big deal for all the Starks, really, is their relationship with death and how it went very differently than how their parents may have planned it for them. And this is important for us, for Arya specifically, because we need to ground ourselves, as Nina puts it, in Arya's reality. Her approach to death and the people she wants to kill is unique, to say the least. She's very aware of the feudal responsibility and privilege that comes with being a Stark. She sort of expects some of that because she's a Stark. For example, she expects Harwin to be loyal to her because Harwin was her father's man. But even though Harwin is not her father's man, he's become a Brotherhood Without Banners member. So, but she feels like the obligation of dealing out justice to people that have broken certain laws. Like she kills Darion because he broke the vows of the Night's Watch. That's not really her business, but she saw it as an act of justice. Her father didn't take her to that execution, but she knew what was going on. She knew they were going to an execution, so she associates her family, her father, Starks, with being the facilitators of justice. So that's part of why she has that attitude, is she's a Stark, and in her mind, Starks deliver justice. Now, she's scrappy and unafraid to get dirty and rarely, holds her privilege over others. It happens occasionally, but she's more, down in the muck with other people. She doesn't hold herself over other people. She kind of gets down in the dirt with them, right? It doesn't usually come up when she's having relations with other people, discussing things with people. Like, she doesn't like it. In fact, there's a couple times where Gendry mocks her about it. It's like a reversal. Like, oh, you're a highborn, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, don't talk to me like that. It's kind of it's almost ironic. She's like, don't talk to me like that because I'm highborn, but don't tell me I'm highborn. So, because yes, despite all her getting in the muck and getting, in the dirt, not living the way you would expect a person of privilege, she is still a child of Ned and Catelyn, right? She still has a lot of their traits. She's a Stark and a Tully, more of a Stark than a Tully. That's where she was raised, in Winterfell, so that's fair. But definitely some of both. Some of those, standard noble values of, hey, we're in charge, we deal out justice, we're the authority figures here. But she's separated from a lot of that too. So much of this is learned at a very young age, and now out in the world she's learning all these new things, separated from her wolf pack. And that's where her journey truly begins. Her journey at home was, again, that was the Septa Mordane stuff, and Ned being like, should I let you carry a sword? Things like that, which is like, now that's, well, of course she's carrying a sword. She's quite good at it. And other blades, too, and so many other things. And far from being graceful and keeping she's able to keep her needle straight, which she probably could sew pretty well now, too. But she's sewed things like flesh instead of just sewing her garments. So even in that separation, even as a refugee, even as a person that the House of Black and White is trying to make into no one, she's still Stark. You can't change that about her. Above everything else, Arya is extremely stubborn. And being a Stark comes with certain duties that she sees in her perspective, like I said, justice and doing the right thing, things that she learned from her family. The origin of the prayer. It starts soon after Yoren and many others are killed by Sir Amory Lorch and his men. It's a horrible experience, of course, but Arya and a few others of her companions escape from it, only to, in turn, wind up in the clutches of Sir Gregor and his men instead, which is quite a bit worse. As an aside, consider how this works out for Tywin's Reavers is something that Arya experienced mostly directly, because she basically dealt with all these people at one point or another. So he sends out, Tywin does, Gregor, Lorch, and Hoat into the Riverlands to be evil, we'll say. Lorch finds Yoren, Arya and company escape, but she frees Jaqen, Rorge, and Biter. Arya and company wind up in Gregor's clutches next, so they just go from one of the three to the next. And then Jaqen, Rorge, and Biter, who were freed by Arya, don't wind up in Gregor's clutches. They go a different direction. They join Amory Lorch, the man that just nearly burned them to death. And then later, when Armory Lorch is victim of the weasel soup incident, Rorge and Biter turn and join the Bloody Mummers instead. So they switch from one of the two, or one of the three, to a different one. And later, Vargo Hoat kills Armory Lorch, and then Clegane kills Hoat. And then, of course, Clegane is semi-killed by Oberyn. And this is when she first witnesses torture. She's aware of executions. She maybe had seen some bad things before. She had been through some minor things, but this is just far beyond anything she had seen. The Tickler's questioning, the Mountain's indiscriminate brutality, and she realizes how little Syrio had truly taught her after all. Reality came to her too young. Quote,
Arya watched them die and did nothing. What good did it do you to be brave? One of the women picked for questioning had tried to be brave, but she had died screaming like all the rest. There were no brave people on that march, only scared and hungry ones. Most were women and children. The few men were very old or very young. The rest had been chained to that gibbet and left for the wolves and the crows.
Now, she didn't technically see her father's death because Yoren stopped her from seeing it, but she was there. She knows what happens. She probably saw his head pulled up over the crowd if she didn't see the actual moment of execution. She knows what happened. And she had also killed someone by then herself. She killed that stable boy with Needle during the escape. So, not her first experience with death, like I said, either personally or even Arya had already lost her father. But this is on another level, this relentless torture, hearing screaming and marching. And she's so clinical about it. She says, she's not like, I'm a coward. She's just like, bravery is pointless here. She's like, she's not afraid to be brave. She just sees how useless it would be in a moment like this. And that's what she realizes, that what Syrio taught her isn't sufficient. They just took her sword away from her and put her in the situation. Simple as that. She had almost no chance to stop it. George writes this as predominantly as hatred. She's afraid. She has fear, but it's hate that is really the predominant emotion here. It's the thing that's overwhelming her. It's the main manifestation here. She hates Polliver for taking her sword. She hates the Tickler for all the torture. Joffrey and Cersei for what they did to her father, and a few other things. And Sir Gregor for, well, just a lot of things, but related to, all under the category of brutality, basically. All just being a violent, awful person. And she keeps having these thoughts over and over. She has not much else for her to think about. This hatred. And it manifests into this tangible group of names. It becomes a list. Here's the first time in Arya 6, A Clash of Kings. Quote,
Every night Arya would say their names. Ser Gregor, she'd whisper to her stone pillow. Dunsen, Polliver, Chiswick, Raff the Sweetling, the Tickler and the Hound, Ser Amory, Ser Ilyn, Ser Meryn, King Joffrey, Queen Cersei. Back in Winterfell, Arya had prayed with her mother in the Sept and with her father in the Godswood, but there were no gods on the road to Harrenhal, and her names were the only prayer that she cared to remember.
The hatred manifests in a number of ways, as we said, and it overlaps with that fear. Perhaps no better in the case of the Tickler, a man so inhuman that we never actually hear his real name. Of him, she thinks, quote, the Tickler was almost too scary to hate. So that is why I chose him as this example, because he's perhaps the one that scares her the most. And you can see why. I mean, a torturer who seems to take pleasure in what he's doing. This is a great example of George's ability to write horror. This is a supernatural setting, but there is nothing supernatural about this guy. He's just a bloodthirsty psycho who legitimately enjoys what he's doing. And that's what Arya keys in on, I think, and why he realizes he's such a scary guy. She lacks the maturity to put it into words and maybe the understanding of psychology, but she grasps it on a way that she's unable to express. Gregor is psycho too, but he's angry and hateful. He has lusts to satisfy, and inflicting pain seems to be one of them. But he never seems to enjoy himself. Gregor's never like, that was great. I feel good. That doesn't happen. he's in severe pain and he inflicts severe pain. The tickler just loves being cruel. He legitimately enjoys it. It's a different kind of psycho. And I do think it's appropriate to think of it the way Arya does. Yeah, I'm calling it a list, but it really is a prayer. It's like a mantra. It is like a focus exercise. She's focusing her energies rather than feeling like she's surrendered or given up. It's like
she's manifesting.
She's manifesting. This is mindfulness. The mindfulness of trauma and revenge, of seeing death as something lesser, of seeing it as normal, which in her life it has been normal. Arya hates herself and her fellow captives for being sheep, but she recognizes there's nothing they can do. She recognizes that she should have been more prepared to deal with this, even though she's so young. She should be a person that's capable of dealing with a situation like this, of being able to defend herself, of being able to defend others. She hates that helplessness. And she hates how they took her courage. She felt good about herself. She escaped from Lorch and fought her way out and saved Jaqen, Rorge, and Biter, and she accomplished a lot. She proved to herself what she was capable of. That was the first time she was, in an adventure. It was terrible. It was terrifying. You wouldn't call it an adventure, but it was, using her skills besides just being a captive. But then she became a captive, and she's like, oh, this is what it's like. And remembering the people that wronged her, remembering the people that inflicted this on her is everything, besides wanting to get home. But those two things are overlapped because those people are in her way of getting home. So it's very appropriately called a prayer in this context because it is something she repeats to comfort herself, to focus herself, to be mindful, to remember what's important, to keep her eye on the prize. And it works. The Jaqen of the Lamp brings 3 death wishes. I first brought this concept up in Valar Rereadus, but here we can explore it a little differently and go a little deeper with it in some ways. Jaqen cleverly uses his debt to Arya to recruit her, and in the process, George is able to play around with the old genie and the 3 wishes trope. He does it in a way reminiscent of Jon appealing to Ned, as in appealing to a higher power. Now, let me explain. Ned didn't want to keep the direwolves, but Jon appealed to the old gods, which is the only authority figure Ned would ever listen to. He can't say, hey, I, Jon, think you should keep the direwolves. But he said the old gods sent a sign. And Ned's like, ooh, I don't want to go against that. He's got a good point there, Jon does. And as an aside, also, he probably very much respected Jon's take there. Bran was loved Jon in that moment. He's like, oh, thank you, Jon, for putting it that way. Ned probably realized he was doing that too, and respected Jon and for that. And what a strange moment that must have been. He's like, boy, this kid really is my son, even though he's not my son. This kid really is a Stark. So likewise, Jaqen doesn't tell Arya, I owe you 3 deaths. He says the Red God is owed those 3 deaths. It's not a matter of what Jaqen wants. It's a matter of what the Red God wants. Don't deny the Red God his due. So he's really putting a hard sell on here. He wants to get her involved. He wants to give her a taste of that power, of what it's like to have the power to kill. For whatever reason, he figured this out about her. And one theory I have, is kind of a newer theory, at least for me, is that, well, much, much later, Arya says the prayer out loud at the House of Black and White. She starts to say it in her mind because she realizes people can hear her. At one point, the kindly man confronts her. He's like, what's that list you're saying? She's like, we actually have that quote later. We'll get to it. But I wonder if she was saying it out loud at Harrenhal, whispering, and Jaqen heard her and was like, yes, interesting. So he kind of got her in by promising these deaths, saying it's the matter of the gods, insists it must be done, right? And it's very ironic when you think about it. Like, you really owe 3 deaths because these deaths would have happened, right? If Arya hadn't saved them, those 3 people would have died. But you just saved 3 killers. Those plenty more deaths are going to happen because of Rorge, Biter, and Jaqen being free. If they had died right then, that would have saved lives. That's so. I don't think you need more deaths to make up for that. But anyway, yeah. So that's a new term for me. Dark. You have humorously ironic, but now we have dark humorously ironic. So And some of those would be by burning, right? George, Jaqen, and Biter, they had to have burned some people, right? Because it's the Red God owed the death, and he's very particular about how he gets his, yeah. So here's another scene where Arya's thinking about it. As I said, a lot of this happens in Harrenhal, and at first, she's not so sure. It violates some of what she's learned about death and killing and how it should be done. Basically what she learned from her family. Here's the quote.
As she worked, Arya thought about the people she wanted dead. She pretended she could see their faces on the steps and scrubbed harder to wipe them away. The Starks were at war with the Lannisters, and she was a Stark, so she should kill as many Lannisters as she could. That was what you did in wars. But she didn't think she should trust Jaqen. I should kill them myself. Whenever her father had condemned a man to death, he did the deed himself with ice, his greatsword. If you would take a man's life, you owe it to him to look him in the face and hear his last words. She'd heard him tell Robb and Jon once.
Notice that Ned didn't tell her that. She overheard it, but it still had the same effect that it probably had on those two for the most part. So yeah, the Northern ideal this is being violated by this. She's like, well, my father said you should swing the sword yourself. But she realizes how powerless she is to do that, even though she wants to. This, along with the just constant evil and brutality around her, from the small-scale abuse of Whis to the torture of more captives and people, and just watching Gregor and the Tickler and all, just the day-to-day of that is just overwhelming. So eventually she accepts Jaqen's offer, but also dedicates herself to the idea of learning how to do it herself. She's like, yeah, I'm going to let Jaqen do this, but I want to learn how to do it myself too. Which brings us back to, that's probably exactly what he wanted. He wanted to bring her in, make her responsible for some deaths, make her like it, or at least see how she takes to it, and then do further recruitment things, which I've got one or two more of them here coming in a minute. Now, the trope of the genie and the three wishes is inverted further here, or perhaps not inverted, but played in a way that's very familiar. Arya does the thing that a lot of people do with that third wish. They try to wish for more wishes, which is super familiar. I love that. This is such a great inversion. Now, but there is a difference here. The trope is slightly inverted or changed a bit by Arya wishing for the third name to be him. She says the third death should be you. Very clever. Even the genie can't outthink that one, which is probably just justifying in Jaqen's mind. It's like, oh yeah, I'm recruiting the right girl here. She gets it. this girl knows what's up. This was a good move by her. We need her. We want her on our team. So what is it? Of course, this ends with Weasel Soup, right? That's where it goes from there. She gets him to unsays the name in agreement to freeing these Northerners from prison, and the net result of that is 8 dead guardsmen of Armory Lorch. Now remember, Jaqen makes sure to rub some of the blood from one of his kills on Arya's jerkin, so that she has the blood of that death on her. So the blood is on her hands as well. Again, all plays into the recruitment, the responsibility angle of this. You know, you can't just give the order and not have responsibility for the death, which is something Arya hasn't really fully sussed out yet. That's a big theme that we're going to be tackling throughout this episode. Is Arya is too young sometimes to understand responsibility. She blames Ilyn Payne for killing her father. Fair, he did that, but the person who gave the order is the bigger deal. And fairly, she blames Joffrey for that. Joffrey gave the order right in front of everybody. But who encouraged Joffrey to do that? Probably Littlefinger. And she doesn't have Littlefinger on her list. So that's something that's coming that we'll talk about a bit, is that this is the kind of thing that Arya hasn't learned to think through. Like, well, who's behind it? Who sent the man to do the murder? That's the power structure, the authority levels, and all the ins and outs of that. She hasn't fully figured that out. And it's a big deal for her because of who she works for, meaning the House of Black and White. Like, who's behind all that? Is there a person in charge? Are they really just all sort of, equally in charge there. There's a lot of mystery in terms of like who's running that place and do they have a connection to the Iron Bank? And these theories get a little off of what we're dealing with today, but I wanted to throw them out there because it relates to Arya's naivete in that regard. And this is one of the things that the adults can get past her because she's too young to even consider some of these things. But how long will that be true? She's eventually going to start figuring some of these things out. Now, let's talk about the full list. Let's get into the actual list, the names on it, and start to get into that particular nitty-gritty. Arya has only 5 chapters in A Game of Thrones. That's 7% of the book. Of course, the list doesn't come there. A lot of the things that drive her to make the list happen in book 1, but in The Clash of Kings, she has 10 chapters, twice as many, and that's the second most chapters of anybody. It's also the second most percentage of the book. She's 14% of the book is her POV. Tyrion is first on both counts in that one, so Arya is number 2 in both cases there. So she goes from one of the lesser POVs to one of the most major ones, and chapter 26 is when the prayer first appears. Chapter 26 of A Clash of Kings. That's her 6th chapter. She has 6 chapters in the first 26. And then she has another one in chapter 30. So that's wild. Arya is way the main character of the first part of A Clash of Kings. 7 of the first 30 chapters are hers. Almost a quarter, right? But then she only has 3 more chapters for the rest of the book, which is 40 chapters. So 7 out of the first 30, but only 3 out of the next 40. So really, early A Clash of Kings is very Arya. So again, it appears in her 6th chapter, the list does, then it's in her 7th, then it's in her 8th. It's not in her 9th, but it is in her 10th, and it evolves along the way. In A Clash of Kings, she spends most of her time at Harrenhal, right? And at the end is when she flees while Roose Bolton is still in control. In A Storm of Swords, she spends her time with her friends for a stretch before running into the Brother Without Banners, right? Then she's eventually kidnapped by Sandor and spends a lot of time with him. She says the prayer twice in chapter 1 of A Storm of Swords. Then again in chapter 3, 5, 7, 8, twice in chapter 9 with some names freshly crossed off. And then that's about it. So she doesn't say it for a while after the Red Wedding. She's more in grief and fear and not sure what to do. So, yeah, she's not thinking about killing the people who weren't involved with it because she knows it was the phrase. She was there. I mean, she was at the Red Wedding briefly. So she knows basically who's responsible, but she doesn't know their names. So a little more on that later. The Freys are on her list, sort of. She just doesn't know what their names are. In A Feast for Crows, it's almost immediately happens. The prayer comes up, and then in her 2nd chapter, it comes up 3 times in A Feast for Crows. Now, she's only got 3 chapters in that book. In A Dance with Dragons, she's only got 2 chapters, but in both chapters it happens. In fact, in the 2nd chapter, it happens twice. It doesn't happen in the Mercy chapter, but she kills someone on her list in the Mercy chapter, so it's a much more intense version of the list. It's an actual crossing of a name off. She doesn't actually have to say the list. She acts on it. So that's like almost every chapter with multiple times it being twice. So that's a lot. So here we go with everyone who's been on it or is on it or was on it, because some people have been crossed off. And then again, including people like House Frey, who are names she doesn't know, or people that she could learn were responsible. Because you'll notice in that, for example, she doesn't mention House Bolton. She knows the Freys were involved. She doesn't learn that about House Bolton, but it's not exactly uncommon knowledge, so she could learn about that. So we'll talk about them too. But we'll do it in order. Before the actual list, in her 2nd chapter of A Game of Thrones, the list, there's a proto version of it. It starts to form. This comes when she's sad that Micah was killed by Sandor, and she, poor girl, blames herself.
He held her gently as she turned to him and sobbed against his chest.
Grieve for your friend, but never blame yourself. You did not kill the butcher's boy. That murder lies at the hound's door, him and the cruel woman he serves.
I hate them, Arya confided, red-faced, sniffling. The Hound, and the Queen, and the King, and Prince Joffrey. I hate all of them.
And they all end up on her list, right? All 3 of those and several more, right? And as I said earlier, hatred is the thing that really drives the creation of the list in the first place. And here we go. She hates them. Now, the moment softens a bit. This is part of how it's brought in slowly. Ned sort of makes it a little humorous here. He's able to soften the situation by saying, because Arya's like, Sansa lied about what happened there. And Ned's like, we all lie, and points out with a warm smile that Arya lied about Nymeria running off. And that's his way of saying that, look, just a lie isn't necessarily bad. It's why you lie, right? You can lie for a good reason. And
Ned would know.
Ned would know. Ned would know. He would know better than most. And that was a very well put sentence by him there, where he's like, I know you chased Arya away, and you did it for a good reason. You did it to save her life. And so it's a clever way to introduce that concept to her. And she's like, yeah, that's a good point. Okay. Yeah, Ned, not only does Ned conceal Jon's parentage for all his life, even from Catelyn, but he has to lie to the crowd to save Sansa in front of everybody. When he's being executed by Joffrey, or before he's being executed, before he knows he's going to be executed, he's like, yes, Joffrey is the king. He didn't believe that. He told Varys he didn't believe that, but then Varys is like, yeah, but Sansa. And he's like, okay, I'll lie. Right? Some things are more important than honesty. People's lives, right? We would like the two to be more intrinsically linked, but that's in the real world and in fantasy worlds like this one that aim to be realistic, not so much. So yeah, the list is extremely personal to her. It's not just about justice. It is about justice in so many cases, but it's more about personal justice. For the most part, she doesn't add people to the list for crimes committed against others. The Tickler is maybe an exception. He's just so overwhelming, though. The list is mostly for crimes against her. Things that people did to upset her or to her family, which is kind of the same thing, the way she perceives it. And as we've been saying all along, it only extends to people that she's capable of perceiving as guilty, which is difficult at her age. We'll continue to talk about that. So here's who's dead. Here's who's already been crossed off, that was on the list and isn't anymore. At Harrenhal, of course, like I said, this is when the plotline kicks into high gear, because that's when Jaqen makes the offer, and eventually she accepts it. The first one to go is Chiswick. This is a guy that bragged about a gang rape, and Arya overheard it. And of course, being one of the Mountain's men, he's clearly participated in other awful things that we don't need to think about. This one is one of the worst passages in all the series. It's just so gross and terrifying, but it's realistic that people do these things and brag about it and laugh about it. And Arya recognizes this, is rightfully disgusted by it, and is a good example. This Chiswick didn't do anything to her. So right off the bat, it's a exception to what I was saying before, where it's mostly things done to her or her family. This is not the case. She doesn't even know this person, Lena, this girl that had this awful thing happen to her by the Mountain's men. So it's just so offensive. It's a young girl near Arya's age, near Sansa's age, so she can't let it slide. It's something that has to be answered in kind. So she's not completely selfish with her list of ways. I wouldn't say she's selfish at all. She's 11. So it's a mix. Mostly it's about what's done to her and her family, but her first example was not.
Self-absorbed versus selfish. Like, her list isn't completely self-absorbed. Right?
Yeah,
it's not selfish.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. Self-absorbed, as most children would be. It's hard to have a worldview, a grander view, to think of others when you're that age. Even when you've been sort of taught to, because you're a noble and you're supposed to have authority over other people. So there's a little more of that in a noble household, of thinking about others, but not thinking about others in terms of what they're going through. Thinking about others in terms of telling them what to do and how they fit into your kingdom, what roles they play, not necessarily caring about them as individuals. So he was killed, Chiswick was, by being pushed off a wall by Jaqen. The first death wish. And it's pretty important, it gets her started. She's like, wow, the feeling of getting rid of this awful man is empowering to her. And this is when she starts to feel like the ghost of Harrenhal. She's like, yeah, I'm somebody now. I'm no longer a mouse. I'm a killer. Or at least I have the power of death. Maybe she's not a killer. Maybe she doesn't quite think of herself that, but she's on that. It's the spectrum, the killer spectrum. She's not a zero anymore on that. Well, I mean, she already wasn't because she killed the stable boy. But she felt powerless, and she just starts to bring her back to feeling a sense of agency that she hadn't had since King's Landing. And it goes from there. The next one is Whis. She starts to, feel herself a bit. She's like, yeah, I've got options now. I'm not completely helpless. I can do things like this. And this is when she does become a little more selfish with it, or a little more self-absorbed with it. To her credit, she realizes this. Whis is very abusive to her, lies to her, beats her, and he's abusive to the rest of the workers as well. So at first, she's thinking of killing some more of the Mountain's men. She's like, Dunsen, Raff, Polliver. She's got these, which one of them? The Tickler, maybe. But then they go off on a mission. They leave to go fight in one of Tywin's battles. It actually turns out to be the Battle of the Stone Mill. Point is, they're not there. She can't send Jaqen after them because they're not even in his reach. And the combination of them not being there and the day-to-day constant abuse by Whis focuses her energy on him. So she names him to Jaqen as her second wish, and then tries to change her mind. She's like, actually, what am I doing? He's not important. Yes, he's a big problem for me, but this guy is nobody in the scheme of things. He's not a commander. He's not a leader. He's not Tywin. He's not... But it's too late. Whis is killed by his own dog. Jaqen apparently used basilisk blood, because we know basilisk blood can do that. I have no idea where he got basilisk blood. Maybe he stole it from the Maester's chambers, but that's a mystery for another time. Anyway, it has an interesting effect on her. Now she's down to one death, and that is, she can see the end of her new powers creeping up. She doesn't want to lose that. She's like, well, if I ever use this last wish, then I won't have any more wishes. And I'll go back to being a mouse instead of a ghost. And she can see the end of her power. It's like she was elected and the end of her term is coming and she doesn't want it to end. So she's trying to figure out a way to extend it. Like a lot of people do when they're losing power. It's very human what's happening here. It's just a very unusual and dark power that she has, the ability to whisper a name and have that person die. So this is when we get back to Weasel Soup, or not back to. I've already explained what happened with that. You already know. And during the commotion of all this, Jaqen wipes the blade on her shirts that she's got the blood, and she's, symbolically got the blood on her hands. And then he changes his face in front of her and leaves. Now, he didn't have to change his face in front of her. He could have done that in private. He did that to show her he could do it. So she'd be like, ooh, I want to learn how to do that. She's like, oh, not only are you good at killing, you're good at that. I want to do that. So this is more just wowing the kid to get her to want to learn more and to follow his footsteps. And here's the iron coin, meet me in Braavos, or meet my friends in Braavos. So the full sales pitch is completed by that point. He's like, look, I've done everything I can do now. You're as recruited as I can get, as I can recruit you. I've got other kills to go do. So he leaves during the confusion. And all this helps. This also empowers her in a way she didn't see coming. Because even though she loses Jaqen, she loses her ability to be the ghost in Winterfell, to kill with a whisper, she gets promoted by Roose Bolton. And that actually helps her escape, because she has access to parts of the castle that she wouldn't have had, because she's Roose Bolton's direct servant. She has a flayed man badge on her, which gives her a higher level of authority amongst the servants. And that leads to the conditions that allow her to escape. But before she escapes, right, what happens? The Sir Amory Lorch is killed. The first person on her original list, because Whis and Chiswick were not on the original list. And they were added later. I think Chiswick was added later. Actually, could be wrong about that. But anyway, Lorch was certainly an original member. And for her, his crime was killing Yoren and some of the other boys she was with. But really, it's about Yoren. Now, of all the people that lived in Westeros that had people that wanted to kill them, Amory Lorch would be among the most famous or most well-known. This is a guy that had a lot of enemies. This dude is horrible. Nobody likes this guy. His family probably didn't like him. His own men probably didn't like him. He's just terrible. Just a jerk, not very smart, cruel. Yeah, just no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Basically, if other people had lists of people they wanted to kill, he'd have been on more lists than most people. He might have been the most appearing, the name that appeared on the most lists of people that need to die. Because, yeah, the Martells, for example, they wanted him dead. He's responsible for Princess Rhaenys' death. So that's their, their granddaughter or their niece, depending on which Martell you're talking to. So, or cousin, whatever. And they wanted him dead as bad as Gregor and Tywin, but, they didn't get their chance. Neither did Arya. But Arya at least got to see it. So it's no surprise that Arya didn't get to kill this guy, because he was top 10 most wanted. Now, it was after the Weasel Soup incident. He lost the castle. He had been Castellan, appointed by Tywin. Vargo turned on Tywin, invited Roose into the castle, and boom, that was that. Amory Lorch's death is presented, Nina writes, as almost like a divine reward for Arya. Like, everything fell into place the right way, and she got to witness his death. It just seemed so perfectly for her. She gave up her last wish to make the Weasel Soup thing happen, but Amory Lorch is very possibly the guy she would have targeted otherwise. So she sort of was rewarded for spending her wish on something that wasn't directly about her. It's like the gods gave her that benefit anyway. It's like if I'm a good person, I'll be rewarded in the afterlife. Well, this wasn't the afterlife, but it's a similar kind of concept where she's like, I'm going to do the good thing here, the thing that I perceive as good, and the gods will reward me for it. And it seems to pay off. Like, it's from her perspective, that's kind of what happened. She saved some imprisoned Northmen, men that were in Robb's army, and that's what she thought she was doing. And, yeah. And the bear. It's a bear that kills Amory Lorch. A starving bear in the bear pit. The same bear that later Brienne and Jaime contend with. In fact, do y'all remember when Jaime is like looking for any sort of weapon whatsoever in the bear pit, and he picks up a jawbone and it has maggots on it? Well, that's probably Amory Lorch's jawbone, because it has maggots on it. That means it's fresh. Like, the other bones in there wouldn't have maggots because the meat would have been eaten off, would have rotted or eaten a while ago. But this was fresh-ish. So, yeah, it was probably Lorch's jawbone there. And Arya, when she sees it happen, it's almost like trance-like. She feels like it is like a divine moment, like this is what's supposed to happen. And she thinks the bear is all in black, like Yoren. It's like Yoren getting his revenge. It's a black bear. Yeah. It reminds me a little bit of Dany seeing her brother die. She has more complex feelings for Viserys than Arya has for Amory Lorch and Yoren. But it's an abuser getting a severe taste of their own medicine. Right? Dany was abused by Viserys. She also loved him, which is why it's a lot more complicated. Arya never had any love for Amory Lorch. But it's kind of like a reverie. She sees her brother die, and it's like a release. It's like, yeah, he kind of deserved this, and she feels, and in that moment where she's like, she thinks a dragon, he's no true dragon. A dragon wouldn't burn, right? It's a little bit similar vibe to the bear is all in black. Yeah, that's cool. And the bear is a northern symbol, kind of, the fire is kind of a symbol of House Targaryen. So you got a little similar vibes there. And Tywin was going to blame Clegane's crimes on Amory Lorch when he found out. He was just like, well, I may as well just pin everything on Lorch so I can keep Clegane for myself and not have to turn him over to the Martells. Of course, that didn't work out because Gregor admitted his guilt during the trial by combat. He's like, yeah, I raped her. Yeah, I killed your screaming whelp. Like, oh, you weren't supposed to do that, Gregor. That's what Oberyn wanted, though. He didn't want the, skull getting smashed part, but this all harkens back to my point about Tywin's Reavers all killing each other. They're just resources. They're just, tools to Tywin. He doesn't care. They're not people, right? And also, it's another example of how Tywin is very good at keeping his evil under wraps. We, the reader, are very intimately exposed to it. But most people don't know how bad a guy Tywin is. Tywin's not on Arya's list, right? Like, that's kind of, when you think about it that way, it's like, yeah, he kind of belonged, right? But again, this is that she's not able to parse through these structures of authority and say, yeah, she blames Gregor. She blames Amory Lorch. Tywin sent both of them out. She should absolutely blame him. He's the one who put them in the position to do all the horror that they did. He's the one who gave them permission to do that. But again, she doesn't quite see it that way. She thinks of him specifically again, Armory Lorch, at the House of Black and White. It reminds her when she sees him face death, very cowardly. He's begging and pleading, and it doesn't go well, right? It's not a good death, you could say, because he's so afraid and doesn't fight back, just kind of, is torn apart by a bear while he's crying. So Arya sees both sides of this. She sees that and is very struck by people who come to the House of Black and White for the gift of death, right? For the gift of mercy. They don't call it death. They call it mercy, which is part of why she has that name, Mercy, later. Yep. And the people asking for mercy certainly comes up as well throughout her arc in places that you might not have noticed, that perhaps is meant as a little wink by George. But yeah, they go there willingly to end their lives, to have mercy, and to just end their lives in peace, like a suicide machine. Like they go to visit Dr. Kevorkian, and they want to have they welcome death at that point. Now, to be fair, they get a peaceful death. They get a painless, peaceful death. Well, they're not torn apart by a starved bear. So there's other circumstances that are different here, but still, it's for a young girl in Arya's place. It really speaks to how she's learning about death, how she's seeing all the ways people die, how the ways they face it, and it's a lot for an 11-year-old to learn, to have at her disposal, to have in the front of her mind. But it's part of what makes Arya so darn fascinating. Now, it's also this bit about painless death, brave death versus facing death, with cowardice or with calmness. Armory Lorch himself has his own little philosophy that came up when he was confronting Yoren and was like, look, if you don't open the gates and let us inspect you and see who you have, we're going to attack you. And he's like, well, there's just young boys here, and Armory says, young boys and old men die the same. It's very casually, cruelly. In that sense, well, there is some similarities there, of course, like a stab to the heart will kill one the same as the other, but how they act facing death, what it means to them, the life they experienced before that, not even close, right? So it's death is a complex subject. For some people, it's simple, but for Arya, it's not. Maybe it started off simple, but the longer she goes, the less so it is, which might affect how the list plays out in the long run. Here at History of Westeros, we're here for the obsessed fans. We often choose topics that aren't the most popular. Like, we aren't sitting here trying to come up with topics that will entertain the most people. We try to come up with the topics that people who are really already obsessed will find some familiarity with, that will find something they like. We're not trying to be surface level. We're trying to get really deep with all our topics. The problem with that is it's not mainstream. It's not what the average A Song of Ice and Fire fan doesn't want that. But this is what we do. And we're able to do it because of support of folks like yourselves who spread the word, tell your friends about it, just express the feelings you have for your favorite shows. That goes a long way. It's better than any sales pitch. It's better than anything I could ever say. Because your friends know you. They don't know me. They don't know us. Unless they've listened to us. What do they know? They trust you, though, presumably. And if you've taken the extra step and gone even farther than that and signed up to support us on Patreon or as a Spotify supporter, one of the other financial ways there are to support us, well, we can only say thanks again for that, because it is why we're here. And I wouldn't be able to sit here and focus on these obsessive topics, do these deep dives on the obscure. We would have to just do more episodes about Targaryens and dragons and just the stuff that's the most basic. Because of y'all, we're able to do much more deep divey type topics. I'm so thankful for that, and we're going to keep doing it. But we won't be able to keep doing it forever if we don't continue to have your support. So patreon.com/History of Westeros. Sign up today. Get extra benefits. Benefits? Whoops. Benefits. Like bonus episodes. That's what I was trying to say. Bonus and benefit. Merge those words there. And so we kind of make it worth your while. You give us a little something, we give you a little something back. You also get to participate in Topics Moot 2025. If you join soon, we're just getting started. The first polls have just been launched. We have a poll. We had a set of polls on murders, and other polls on set of executions, famous murders, famous executions. And then at the end of last week, they paired off. Currently, that poll is underway. The murders versus the executions. 3 episodes will be chosen this week. We're choosing 16 episodes total that you all are voting on. And that's Topics Moot 2025. Kimber LaFay says, I'm confused. Jaqen claims the red god is owed, but he works for the many-faced god. Are they the same, or is he playing a role? I think you're picking up on what I was saying, that he's playing a role. He's trying to get Arya in with him, trying to get him to do his things, get her to kill and to associate death with the parlance of gods, and to put it beyond humanity, to say the gods decide who lives and who dies. The prayer of the many-faced god, whether it's the red god or the many-faced god, it's just a way to say this authority comes from above. We are servants. That's the way he's trying to sell it to her, in part because I think he knows his audience. He's been around Arya. He's very good at this. He's very highly trained, and he's able to kind of undo her psychology and say the right things to pull on her heartstrings and to encourage her to get her interested. So I think you're right to key in on that because, I think he's spinning a yarn. He's exaggerating, maybe outright lying in some places to get her to get on his path to become a faceless man. So playing a role, very much. That's a good term to use too, because mummery and playing roles and plays is a big part of her arc as well. As I said earlier, when he leaves, he dazzles her with the face-changing skills and gives her the coin. Now, he had made her feel more powerful, and here is a moment where she's kind of reflecting on that and thinking about what it means now that he's gone. Quote.
Before I read this quote, I want to point out the other important part about this, that, he could have done it out of sight. He didn't have to do this in front of her. He is trying to bring her in. Okay, now, quote. She took out the coin that Jaqen H'ghar had given her and curled her fingers around it as she lay beneath her cloak. It made her feel strong to hold it, remembering how she'd been the ghost in Harrenhal. She could kill with a whisper then.
So the coin, not only is it the token that gets her access, but it's a talisman that causes her to remember how powerful she felt with Jaqen's abilities, with his wishes at her command. So even as he's gone, he left her with this thing that will continue to cause her to think about it, that keeps her mind enraptured and thinking of what could be if she were to find a man of Braavos and speak the words Valar Morghulis. She really likes that phrase too. She starts saying Valar Morghulis pretty regularly. She starts associating it with her list. Yeah? And dark humorously, she even uses the coin to help her kill that Bolton guard when she escapes Harrenhal. It's like it's like part of the kill. She's like, I dropped it on the ground, and he leans over and she stabs him in the throat. So she's less powerful without him and the wishes, but the notion that she could be more powerful really motivates her, and she adjusts quickly, in part because the status she gains through being Roose Bolton's servant. It doesn't change her nightly routine, though. The prayer continues. And as I said, she actually has less duties under Roose, even though it's a promotion to help with Roose, who's, an awful man. She actually has more alone time because Roose's requirements are somehow lesser than Whisa's, because that actually makes sense, because she's working for the entire castle. Now she's just working for one guy. So while Roose is out hunting, and this is the hunting scene when he's out symbolically hunting wolves in concert with his turn against House Stark, which Arya has no clue about, which is very ironic that it happens in front of her. She doesn't figure it out. She still doesn't know he's associated with the Red Wedding. So it's just like, this guy was right there. And then later she'll learn, man, that guy was the cause of so many problems for my house and for myself. And she could have gotten him, but she never knew. So while he's out hunting, we get this scene showing us that instead of a prayer that she's whispering at night, it's becoming more. She's got more confidence in it. And it's not just a whisper, it's something she says out loud. Here it is. Here she is practicing her needlework in the godswood. Quote.
She slashed at birch leaves till the splintery point of the broken broomstick was green and sticky. Sir Gregor, she breathed. Dunsen, Polliver, Raff the Sweetling. She spun and leapt and balanced on the balls of her feet, darting this way and that, knocking pine cones flying. The tickler, she called out one time. The hound, the next. Sir Ilyn, Sir Meryn, Queen Cersei. The bole of an oak loomed before her, and she lunged to drive her point through it, grunting, Joffrey! 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 Her arms and legs were dappled by sunlight and the shadows of leaves. A sheen of sweat covered her skin by the time she paused. The heel of her right foot was bloody where she'd skinned it, so she stood, one-legged, before the heart tree and raised her sword in salute. Valar Morghulis, she told the old gods of the north. She liked how the words sounded when she said them.
So there you go, associating these things together. What she's learned from Jaqen with the old gods of the north, sort of a syncretism of sorts. Her own version of old gods mixed with the House of Black and White, which she doesn't even know the House of Black and White by this point, but that's what she's doing, right? And by the way, excellent reading there, Shay. That was really good.
Oh, thank you.
And
I like reading like Angry Arya.
Yeah, it lines up pretty well. So this is also the chapter she leaves. It's the final chapter of A Clash of Kings for her. So this is like sort of her maybe building up her courage a little more and realizing how she's got to get out of there. She goes and talks to Roose, and this is when Roose tells her that, yeah, he's gonna give the castle to Vargo Hoat, and she's gonna stay with him. And she's like, am I? I don't think I'm gonna do that, actually. And she leaves right away. And that's when she does the dropping coin thing and kills the guard and escapes partly by lying to Gendry about what Vargo Hoat's gonna do. She says Vargo Hoat's gonna cut off his foot. Vargo Hoat didn't say he would do that. He might have done it. I mean, Arya might have been correct, even though she didn't know for sure. So either way, it's another good example of, hey, sometimes a lie is the right thing to do. Now, after escaping Harrenhal, of course, we get into a storm of swords. And this is when she's caught by the Brotherhood without banners. And she sees the justice of the gods fail. This is very interesting to her. Sandor beats Beric and is set free. She knows Sandor's guilty. This isn't some, like, well, what's going to happen? She's very surprised and disturbed by the result because the gods were supposed to be watching and they were wrong. She knows for a fact that Sandor killed Micah and that it was unjust. But he got away. He was freed. They had to let him go. And more confusingly, Beric stood up after being chopped nearly in half. Like, what the heck happened there? So that's confusing, but doesn't directly relate to the list. It does give Arya an even maybe stranger sense of what death means because, well, you've got people who just stand right back up and aren't dead, even though they took mortal wounds. And of course, that is going to come around, presumably, with Sandor himself, who she left for dead. She thinks at first he doesn't deserve the gift of mercy, and then multiple times later, she regrets that. She's like, I should have put him out of his misery. Of course, he's not dead. So she's going to be like, oh, well, I'm glad I didn't give you the gift of mercy after all, because you're alive. Presuming they ever meet again. I think they probably will, or at least hear about each other. And so that's all very interesting to compare to each other, to size up as one whole, to think about this trial by combat. Beric doesn't actually die. Sandor should have died, and then does die later, but doesn't die, actually. So, and as farther into the story as we get, I think we'll see more and more people defying death, either through just confusion, like Sandor Clegane. There's nothing supernatural about Sandor Clegane's example. But with Beric, and if she finds out that Beric, Dondarrion's soul or spirit or whatever, is why her mother is walking around, I mean, this is all very heavy for Arya. And it's all very confusing as to how death works. It's like, well, death isn't working the way death is supposed to work here. Now, of course, she is stolen by Sandor Clegane, kidnapped, for lack of a better word. I know actually kidnapped is pretty much the perfect word. And they spend a lot of time riding around the Riverland together, and more on him a little bit later. He is on the list, so we have a separate section just for him. But this culminates with the Red Wedding. They get to the Red Wedding. She starts to warm up to him a little bit, as much as she can, forgiven his crimes. But she stops wanting to kill him and eventually takes him off the list and stuff like that. And then they go to the end of the crossroads. And they find out Joffrey is dead right before the duel between Polliver and the Tickler and Arya and Sandor and that squire. So, and that's, of course, when she parts from Sandor. So let's talk about Joffrey, because this is the one that happens first there in that scene. She finds out that he's dead, and it's like, wow, that's amazing. But before that, he's probably the number one person on her list, again, for fairly obvious reasons. He was part of the Nymeria Fafo situation there, where Cersei had Lady executed and all that, where both Sansa and Joffrey lied about what happened. And of course, even bigger than that was Joffrey executing her father. So lots of stuff. And even before that, she hated him from the first time she saw him when she was training, or when he was training with Robb, and she and Jon were watching and watching Joffrey be terrible. And Jon said, Joffrey truly is a little shit. And Arya was like, yep. But then Yoren explains to her that he was paid to wait. He was paid to wait to hold his wagons because Lord Stark would be joining his journey north. He'd be taking the Black. Yoren told Arya this. And she knows what happens. She's like, she figures out what really happened and knows who to blame. Quote,
Joffrey, Arya breathed. Someone should kill him.
Someone will, but it won't be me, nor you neither.
I like his voice.
Yeah, that was my Yoren, right? So that's reminiscent of Sansa thinking someone should chop off Janos Slynt's head, which Jon does later oblige. In this case, the someone is in part the same someone responsible for her father's death, but it's actually several someones, right? Because lots of people conspire to kill Joffrey. It's not even entirely clear how many people, but we know Olenna and Littlefinger for sure, and they made Sansa included in that. And of course, this comes up in the story. When he's dead, they're told that Sansa was part of it, right? And then she's like, what? Because the story is very dubious, though. It's Sansa turned into a bat wolf and flew off after blaming the imp, and Sandor laughs about that, and Arya's like, that's stupid. Sansa doesn't know spells, she knows songs. So she doesn't fully form a thought about it. But everyone knows Tyrion escaped after his lost trial by combat, so that's just common knowledge. Even Arya and Sandor know that. And despite all the swirling rumors, there's no disputing that Joffrey's dead, so she knows that for a fact now. And it circles around too. If we fast forward all the way to the Mercy chapter, well, the play that she's in is called The Bloody Hand. It's about Tyrion murdering Joffrey, among other things. So it probably, we don't actually see that spoken of in the play. A lot of other details pop up here and there, but it's not like Joffrey's name is specifically mentioned. You would just assume it's in there. And the TV version had him there, if I remember correctly. Not that has much bearing here, but still, just a way to jog our memories. You would wonder, though, Nina asks a good question here, what would Arya's take be on the depiction of that event in the play? She's like, that's not how it happened, or it's close enough, or if she just doesn't care. I imagine it's not the third option. I imagine she does care, but she probably keeps it to herself. I wonder if we'll find that out. Because by the end of the Mercy chapter, she already knows that she's going to be kicked out. She's going to face the consequences for what she's done. So we'll see. Now, in this moment where Joffrey calls for the execution of her father, it's, of course, Sir Ilyn who actually does the execution. More on him later, though, because we're going through the people who are dead. And Ilyn is not dead. Again, I want to point out Littlefinger's involvement. Littlefinger is almost certainly the one who planted the seed in Joffrey's mind, the one who sowed the chaos here and said, hey, don't listen to the women. They're soft-hearted. How can you possibly stand for treason? You should execute this guy to set an example, right? And he's like, that's strength. That's what a man would do. That's what the kind of things Littlefinger probably said to Joffrey to get him to execute Ned. Anyway, Arya does need to be a little more savvy about such things. I would hope anyway that she learns to look at who's giving the orders, as we said. I feel like Tywin, it's obviously too late for Tywin. He's dead. But I do think that this is a thing that we can say yet about. Like, I think Arya will start to understand some of these things, whether it's taught to her or whether she figures it out on her own or a little of both. Either way, I think it's coming. Getting wiser in the ways of the world. I mean, it's part of her education. It's the kind of thing that we might have fast forwarded on if we had the 5-year gap. She probably just jumped ahead 5 years and she's probably just wiser. That makes sense. I mean, going from age 11 to 16, you would think that's an important 5 years of wisdom gaining there. A lot of naivete would be shed in those 5 years. But it's going to have to happen differently, the way it's actually playing out. She also, one of the things she has to come face to face with is that, her father and mother could be wrong sometimes. I don't think she's fully grasped that. I think she's maybe danced around that idea in her mind, but maybe not fully suggested it. She's willing to admit Sansa could be wrong. So she's not like, my family's always right. She doesn't have that attitude. But like a lot of young people, very young people, you often have a unrealistic version of your own family, your own parents, like thinking that they can't do anything wrong if they're good parents, that is. Which Ned and Catelyn are, I would say. Yeah, Anina also wonders, like, what extent will Arya ever learn about Littlefinger's crimes? Like, surely she won't learn everything that he's guilty of. That would be kind of ridiculous for everything to come to light. I mean, he's guilty of so much. And it's probably more of a Sansa thing to deal with Littlefinger. That's her great foe, her final boss of sorts to topple. But Arya could help. Arya could be the one to swing those swords. Or Sansa could pass the sentence. But she won't be swinging that sword herself, I don't think. Arya might be the one to do that, though. And especially if Arya learns a few things. It wouldn't take much for Arya to be on board with killing that guy, right? And it's like, yep, he's the one that encouraged our father's death. He's the one that, killed Aunt Lysa. There's a bajillion crimes. Jane Poole. He could find out what she did to her. Like, if that's one of the more likely ones. Arya being in Braavos, where Jane Poole's going to be with Justin Massey. If they run into each other, she's like, oh, hey, that's Jane Poole. I know her. She made fun of me, but, that's probably not that much of a obstacle to them having some sort of reconnection. And she'll find out what the Boltons did to Jane Poole, but that Littlefinger's the one who put her in that position and forced her into sex work and then sold her to the Boltons as fake Arya. So there's a lot she can learn through that connection. But getting back to Joffrey, her reaction to him when she hears that she was poisoned, given how badly she wanted his death, even above a lot of the others, let's hear the quote.
Joffrey's dead. She could almost see him with his blonde curls and his mean smile and his fat, soft lips. Joffrey's dead. She knew it ought to make her happy, but somehow she still felt empty inside. Joffrey was dead, but if Robb was dead too, what did it matter?
She's getting pretty close to the Mirri Maz Dur philosophy example, which says, if everything you love is lost, then what good is life, right? She hasn't lost everyone, but she lost her mother, she lost Robb, she lost her father, and she thinks maybe she's lost more than that. As it turns out, the rest of her family is alive, but she's not sure of that. So it's quite a moment for her. She thinks that she should be happy that Joffrey's dead, but she's not. Death isn't as sweet as she thought it would be. Revenge isn't what she expected. And maybe it's deserved, but it doesn't make her feel happy. Justice isn't supposed to make her feel happy. It's supposed to maybe be satisfying or just a thing that needs to be done. It's a duty, but it's not what she thought it would be. And that's a really important part of her character development. and is likely playing a role in how she sees death in the later cases. It's probably not Joffrey isn't probably the person that horrified her the most. That's probably the tickler. But this is the one who she probably personally hated the most. So her reaction is very telling. There's no the fact that there's no sweetness to it. On the other hand, the Red Wedding was so fresh in her mind. I mean, it was only a couple chapters prior to this, so she's still very much feeling the effects of that. So a lot's going on, and it's also, even in this case, she doesn't have much time to even think about it in this moment, because this is, again, happening at the end of the crossroads, right? This is all being said to her right before a huge bloody duel breaks out. So very quickly, she's distracted and fighting for her life. So it's not like she has a lot of time to ponder and philosophize about her own views on death. Not like an 11-year-old would do that. She might do it, as a matter of course, but she wouldn't actively be like, you know what, I need to think about death more. I need to consider my relationship with death. So yeah, things escalate rather quickly, and it leads to more names being crossed off. Polliver is the first one to die, killed by the Hound. Polliver stole Needle from Arya. And right after this encounter, she takes Needle back and uses it to finish off the third person killed in this encounter. So Polliver dies by Sandor, and she's able to cross him off later the next time she thinks of the list. Now, she thinks of him as less brutal, not a cruel sadist, and the logic of he stole Needle from her is a little bit lighter than a lot of the crimes committed by others, like the Tickler, for example. But he's one of the Mountain's men. I mean, he's complicit to a lot of crimes, to a lot of horrible things, even if he's less brutal than the average Mountain's man. The bar is so low that you might not trip over it. So it's pretty bad. So he's quite dead. Then we go to the Tickler, who, as we said earlier, is probably the one that scared Arya the most. Too scary to hate, she thought about him. Don't know what his real name ever is. And this is perhaps the man that most inspired the list in the first place. If anyone, there's too many people involved in this to pin it all on one person. But if you're going to say who has the biggest share of creating the list other than Arya herself, I would put it on the Tickler. And think of how she reacts. Remember that moment. I didn't want to quote it because this is too much to make Ashea read this. But think of how she reacts when killing him. It's not her usual demeanor. She's got the wolf blood. She is gone full Brandon Stark or Jon when he's sparring with Iron Emmett and he just loses time. She's stabbing him over and over. She's shouting the things he would say calmly to people when torturing them. Is there gold in the village? Is there gems? Repeating these things over and over as she's stabbing him. It's really extreme. Sandor pulls her off of him that's enough. That guy is quite dead. You're disturbing even me. And of course, Sandor he's seen some stuff, right? Disturbing Sandor? Wow, that's bad. What disturbs him, So she's just, it's this pent up rage and it's all the emotion that went into her creating the list in the first place is released in that moment of stabbing him. And she thinks of how easy it was. He's so focused on the Hound because Polliver's dead and he's I'm one-on-oneing with the Hound. And that focus is what enables her to sneak up behind him and stab him in the back. And that's that. So that's the first one she crosses off the list personally. Again, I don't count Weiss and Chiswick, even though they were on the list, because Jaqen crossed them off. She gave the order. He did it. She didn't commit the murder herself. There is certainly, that doesn't mean she's not responsible, but still, I want to make that still a different level of culpability. Now, remember there was that scene where she's clutching the coin. We quoted that earlier. She clutches the coin and she's thinking of the list and she says Valar Morghulis. It's an interesting moment here when this happens again because the personality, the personal aspects of revenge start to fade for her. It's pretty interesting. Here we go. Quote.
Arya tried to imagine how they would look when they were dead, but it was hard to bring their faces to mind. The Hound she could see, and his brother the Mountain, and she would never forget Joffrey's face or his mother's. But Raff and Dunsen and Polliver were all fading, and even the tickler, whose looks had been so commonplace.
However, it's kind of like riding a bike. Once you see that face again, it all comes back. The visual memory can be restored when you are refreshed. For example, let's fast forward to The Winds of Winter. Yes, Mercy chapter. Quote.
There were 4 guards, big, hard-looking men in ringmail, with heavy Westerosi longswords sheathed at their hips. Their crimson cloaks were bordered in whorls of gold and golden lions with red garnet eyes clasped each cloak at the shoulder. When Mercy glanced at the faces beneath the gilded, lion-crested helm, her belly gave a quiver. The gods have given me a gift. Her fingers clutched hard at Dana's arm. That guard! The one on the end, behind the black pearl!
So she has no trouble remembering him when his face is right there to be seen. She almost loses herself. She almost forgets herself. Of course Dana has no idea who that is. She asks about she asked Dana, she's like, who is that? Do you know that guy? And she's like, why would I know that guy? He's a Westerosi guard. And she's like, oh yeah. She's like, why are you even asking? And Dana, she plays it off. Mercy's like, oh, he just seems so handsome. And then she runs with that idea of pretending she's attracted to him. All the way to his death. And who is this person? It's Raff the Sweetling. Now, Raff is on the list because he killed Lamy Greenhands. He did a lot of other awful things, like a lot of the people on the list, especially the Mountains Men. He killed a toddler and then her mother. Raff was definitely a candidate to be killed as Jaqen's second or third wish. But Arya realized, like some of the others, that she couldn't get him because he left to go to the Battle of the Stone Mill and wasn't around, simply out of range. But that worked out because she got him herself much later. So this again is where I remind you to check out our Mercy chapter audio playthrough, full acting and sound effects and all that, different voices, a bunch of different people doing each character. And she flirts with him while he's guarding during the play, telling him, hey, we've got time to run off together because the play is going to take a while. And she leads him to her home, notably, which is dangerous. Not for her in terms of her putting her in physical danger, but like, you're not a smooth murderer isn't usually killing people in their own house, right? That's usually a way to get caught. Like, that's usually you're killing somewhere else where people won't find out. Like, it's not like she owns this house. It's like a little apartment that she's renting. So she kills him with Needle, and Nina points out how this is a really culmination of what she's learned at her time in Braavos. Like, every skill she's learned in Braavos, she puts into use to kill Raff the Sweetling. First of all, she's good enough at speaking Braavosi, and pretends to be bad at Common. And at one point, she's like, "Yeah, he doesn't speak Braavosi. Am I gonna have to pretend to know Common? Like, how far am I willing to go with this?" And she barely hesitates. She's like, "Okay, I'm gonna pretend to speak Common badly," and she does that. Then she knows enough about bodies. She knows so much about anatomy that she's learned from the House of Black and White that she's able to just cut his femoral artery, I think is the one she cuts. And it's so smooth, he doesn't even know she did it on purpose. She's able to play it off like an accident. She's like, "Oh my God, I cut you. You're bleeding so heavily." And he's like, "Oh, what did you do? Get me a towel or whatever." He doesn't realize that he doesn't recognize it as an attack on him. She's so smooth with it. And that's also having been taught by the Faceless Men to be so smooth with her knife. And then her plan to get him there in the first place seems to be inspired by one of the sex workers, Savrone. There was a girl, Savrone, who would murder her clients. She's a sex worker that would kill some of her clients and throw their bodies into the canals to be eaten by eels, which is what Arya does here. She drags his body to be eaten by eels, throws it into the canal. After she kills him, she's like, "Now, why did I do that here? Why I got to drag his body all the way to the canals?" Because she wasn't thinking it through. She was just so eager to scratch this name off and to put her skills into use. And she makes this whole thing into a play. This whole episode, this whole event of killing Raff the Sweetling it's a theater production. She tells him she's going to teach him to say a line, then cues him to say that line. And that line is, "You'll need to carry me," which is the last thing Lamy said. What did he say to Lamy? He said, "Think so?" and then stabbed him through the throat with his spear. You might remember the show version where he stabbed him through the throat with needle, which that's almost more poetic, but that's not what happened in the book. But here in the book, it is the same exact phrase. "You'll need to carry me." And Arya says, "Think so." And in the chapter, the name Raff the Sweetling isn't revealed at any point until she says, "Think so." It's just Lannister guardsman, handsome. You can figure it out. A lot of people knew who it was just from context. But the name doesn't come up until this moment. Quote.
Raff the Sweetling looked up sharply as the long, thin blade came sliding from her sleeve. She slipped it through his throat beneath the chin, twisted, and ripped it back out sideways with a single smooth slash. A fine red rain followed, and in his eyes the light went out. "Valar Morghulis," Arya whispered. But Raff was dead and did not hear. She sniffed.
And as I started to allude to a minute ago, this is when she starts to think of the consequences, start to realize the consequences, minor and major. The minor consequences of having to drag the body to the canals, major consequences of, well, that's it for me in the play, in the playhouse. They're going to kick me out of that. And it's going to be a problem for some people. Because, for example, she thinks this would make trouble for the Sea Lord and the envoy with the chicken on his chest. She did not doubt. They saw her. The other guard that Raff was with, there was a pair of guards, saw Raff leave with her. And he's not going to come back. And she is. So it's pretty blatant. Like, this guard went off with her and didn't come back. And there's a witness. So, yeah, this isn't something she can just kind of evade. And she knows it. She absolutely knows it. And, yeah, Nina points out she absolutely prioritizes her revenge over doing the faceless man thing she's supposed to do. Like, just completely throws it all away in a second for a chance at revenge. Just boom. Like, doesn't even think about it. It's instant. Doesn't consider it, doesn't, maybe I shouldn't do this. Is this worth it? No, just does it. She just does it. Let's talk about alive. Who's still alive? Alive in quotes. Because Sandor Clegane is alive, as far as we know. But Arya doesn't know that. So, in a sense, he's dead. In her mind, she's dead. In her mind, he's dead. And now the reason, of course, he's on the list was because he killed Micah. So in some ways, he's the original member of the list because he was the first one to really do something. Of all the things that someone is on the list for, this was the first one. Let's put it that way. He also stole her from the Brother Without Banners, hit her with the flat of his axe. She complained about that, but even she's being stubborn about that one. He actually saved her life with that one, and I think she even knows it. But Sandor is very unique on this list. The only person to be removed from the list for reasons that aren't about his death, because she took him off the list before she left him for dead. And it's a way for George wrote it subtly, like she won't admit it, but she's still saying her prayer and he's not on it anymore. So yeah, that happened. He learned a lot from her. I wouldn't go so far as to call him a father figure, and it's a bit of an inversion of the wolf and cub trope. But it's a good one. It's a good version of it. It's clever. It's both meaningful and well written and touching in some ways, and also dark. But the two of them have some interesting things in common. So yeah, she learned a lot from him, and arguably he learned some things from her. Maybe not. She wasn't trying to teach him, but just their experience together taught him some things. It's, having actually caring for somebody, actually having a responsibility of caring for someone who's younger and you wouldn't call Arya helpless, but someone who needs care. And very important as well, remember, Sandor taught her how to kill with mercy. She learned that from him. Didn't learn it from Ned or one of her brothers. They encounter that mortally wounded archer on the road after fleeing from the Red Wedding. And he asked for the gift of mercy. And Sandor very gently gives it to him, shoves the blade in his heart quickly, make it as painless as possible, and is telling Arya this as he's doing it, like teaching her, this is how you put someone out of their mercy, or out of their misery, rather. This is how you give someone mercy. It's a subtle, in some ways, and very unsubtle in other ways, foreshadowing the types of things she's going to learn at the House of Black and White. Killing and putting people out of their mercy, or out of their misery. Mercy killing. I mean, she's mercy, right? So, yeah, I mean, this is a person that would have crawled into the House of Black and White to take the gift of death because he's suffering. And a perfect example of that well before she ever gets to Braavos. And it's also ironic that she's learning things about death from Sandor Clegane, who has a pretty unique relationship with death too. Death and pain and suffering and trauma. This is a man who is the opposite of a faceless man. This is a guy who can't go anywhere without being recognized. His great size, his burned face, his reputation. This comes up in this same chapter. After they give this guy mercy, they encounter that small village where they hope to lose themselves for a while, where Sandor's like, hey, I can build this fence for you. I can maybe help you if the clansmen come raiding. But they're like, no, we don't want you here, Sandor. And he's like, oh, so you know who I am? And they're like, yeah, even here in this remote village, we know who the Hound is. Joffrey's dog, they call him. So it's very much the opposite of a faceless man. Compare the Hound, a guy she's attached to. There's nowhere they can go without being recognized. When she gets into the faceless man, they're experts at, you never even know if you may have seen this guy 20 times before, and he's standing right in front of you. And you wouldn't even know it. So it's an interesting dichotomy there. But yeah, she thinks he's dead. And as I said before, she regrets not giving him the gift of mercy. She thought, after all, maybe he did deserve it. But that'll be interesting when she presumably encounters him again and is like, hey, oh, you're walking around. Cool. And I wonder what his reaction to her will be. You know, like, will he think fondly of her? Is it one of the few people in the world that he doesn't hate? You know, Sandor's full of hate, but he doesn't hate Arya. So yeah, I'm looking forward to a reunion there. Maybe it won't happen though. Maybe that's just a show thing. But I think they'll get a chance to at least have a little convo, maybe. Now his brother. This is a little bit simpler in a lot of ways. The Gregor is not as complex as a character as the Hound, as his younger brother. And but his status is arguably more complicated because, again, is he alive? I mean, what do you call him? Is he undead? I think undead is the right term, but what do other people see? In-world, what do they see him as? Because we can call him that pretty easily, but in-world, what do they call him? Like, that's just some creepy guy that never talks or eats or uses the bathroom. So he's on the list for capturing Arya and the other small folk and being directly in charge of the people that abused her and the people she was with, like Dunsen and Polliver and all that, and the Tickler, etc. So now everyone knows he was stabbed by Oberyn Martell. That trial by combat was famous and widespread. The results of that were it was the news, the big news. But Arya's actually unaware of his death because nobody actually knows what happened there. Like, oh yeah, he was taken back and operated on or given surgery, but no one knows. There's an 8-foot guy in armor walking around. Like, it doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Like a lot of people have figured out. Kevin thinks about it. Like, I'm pretty sure I know who that guy is. You can't really hide an 8-foot monster knight. So Arya has never seen another 8-foot person. She's going to know. However, the odds of Arya being the one to actually deal with Gregor, being the one to actually finally put him down, seems pretty unlikely. That seems like it'll be Sandor or someone entirely unrelated. Who knows? But I doubt it'll be Arya. That one would actually be a challenge for her. Some of these other ones would be easy. But you can't just like stab him in the back of his throat and that won't kill him. Yeah, he'll just be like, hey, don't do that. But without the words. Dunsen is next. Dunsen is by far the most unknown, the least descript, the guy we know the least about. The one that has the least description. He stole Gendry's horned helmet. That's even weaker than Polliver's stealing her sword for a reason to deserve death. But again, this is one of the Mountain's men. So, yeah, I'm sure he's done awful things. It's a safe assumption. But I guess he loses the bull helm. Maybe George screwed up here, but it's not a screw up that matters. And it might not be a screw up. It's just a possibility. Because Dunsen takes the bull helm from Gendry, but then Polliver is seen wearing it later. But Polliver doesn't have the helm when Sandor and Arya kill him at the Crossroads Inn. So, ooh, the horned helm is missing. Oh my God. Gendry's horned helm, it's out there somewhere. Dunsen might have it again because Polliver's dead now. Maybe he lost it to him playing dice, but now Polliver's dead, so he got it back. I don't know. No idea where the helm is, but that's a potential way to identify him later because that particular helmet is notable to us. Now, like Raff and the Tickler and Polliver, he was a candidate to be the second or third kill of Death Wish by Jaqen, but he, like the others, rode out on campaign to the Battle of Stonemill before she could make that call. Now, he, of course, unlike those other three, Polliver, the Tickler, and Raff the Sweetling, are all dead. He is not. He appears to have been among the men sent by Jaime to escort Wylis Manderly to Maidenpool, because Wylis Manderly was ransomed, right? He and Manderly, Wyman Manderly and Tywin finally came to a deal. Remember the fake Davos execution plot, so Wylis was sent home, and Jaime wanted those men escorted. So he was like, hey, I don't want anything bad happening to these guys. This is an important dude. We need him to get home safely. Red Ronnet Connington was in charge of these men, and he sent the Mountain's men with Red Ronnet. He's like, hey, you don't have enough dudes. I'll send the Mountain's men with you. These are dudes. Use them, you know? Fast forward a little bit later, Red Ronnet clearly seems to have accomplished that mission because Wylis Manderly did arrive back in White Harbor, but Red Ronnet isn't in Maidenpool anymore because we see him show up in King's Landing during the Kevin epilogue. And he complains about the Golden Company and his cousin John Connington taking Griffin's Roost. He's like, they did this. I've got nothing to do with it. Don't consider me part of them. I want my castle back. I'll do anything to prove it. Give me an army. I'll take the castle back myself. Blah, blah, blah. So that's presumably Dunsen followed Red Ronnet Connington to King's Landing when after completing this mission to Maidenpool. And this adds up in the form of the Mercy chapter, because Raff the Sweetling was in this group as well. Raff and Dunsen both went with Red Ronnet to deliver Wylis Manderly to Maidenpool. So it figures that Raff then followed Red Ronnet to King's Landing and then was sent to Braavos with, what's his name? Chicken Man. Anyway, with the Master of Coin, whose name is escaping me. The really whiny guy. Anyway, it's not important for me to think of his name, but point is, it makes sense that Dunsen was perhaps nominated to go in that as well. He might even be in Braavos and just wasn't in that group before. But probably not. Probably he's just still at King's Landing, just doing guard stuff and hanging out, being a guard. And quite possibly he'll just die in King's Landing amongst all the stuff that's gonna happen. Whether someone burns the city, whether it's who actually burns the city isn't our question of the moment. The point being, Dunsen quite possibly will be killed during all that conflagration, whether it's Dany doing it, whether it's old pyromancer stuff, whether it's some combination of both, whether it's all the above, who knows? Dunsen might not get out of all that. But if he does, it could be an interesting, leftover, dangling participle that Arya needs to handle later. She's like, Dunsen's still alive. Everybody else got crossed off the list, but there's this one guy that I gotta go handle. Can't let him slip through the cracks. A lot more prominent, but a little more mysterious is Sir Ilyn Payne. We already know what he did. He beheaded Eddard Stark. Now, if she and Arya, or if she and Sansa rather, if Arya and Sansa ever get to discuss Sir Ilyn, she'll learn from her sister that Sansa has many nightmares of him. She has had lots of nightmares of Sir Ilyn. She, of course, remembers him. She actually saw Sir Ilyn cut their father's head off, whereas Arya's face was blocked by Yoren. She didn't actually see the killing blow. So her vision of it, her memory of it is a lot more distinct and horrible. And she's had memories of like marrying Joffrey and Sir Ilyn being there, and just of of Robb turning into Sir Ilyn, if I'm remembering correctly. Just a variety of nightmares about him. So she'd be like, yeah, that guy, I wouldn't mind seeing him die. Now, Jaime has experience with this man. He thinks at one point Sir Ilyn lives for killing. He doesn't care about anything else. He keeps his sword immaculate. He keeps his steel, well polished and all that, but his room is disgusting. It's like nothing about him. He doesn't seem to care about anything else. It's like anything that's part of the killing and fulfilling the duties of his office, which is the king's justice. He doesn't care. It's only that, which is a very interesting contrast to what Arya has been taught about killing. It's a very much at odds with the thinking of the Faceless Men and their attitude towards the gift of death and how you don't choose who does it. You're not supposed to take pleasure in it, etc. This is another one that I kind of doubt Arya will have anything to do with. I mean, it's hard to imagine their paths crossing again, at least soon, I'll get to exactly where I think Arya will be and why she might not be in the Riverlands a little bit later, but he's in the Riverlands with Jaime, right? And Jaime just went off and got himself captured by the BWB. Ilyn was not captured with Jaime. He was captured by himself. So presumably, I don't know what's going to happen with Jaime's army. They're like, well, what do we do without our commander? Can we go back to King's Landing to face Cersei without Jaime? Well, will she just like have us all killed? Well, she won't kill the whole army, but the commanders of the army would be wary of returning without Jaime. Although if Cersei at this point is in the clutches of the faith, so maybe they figure this is the right time to come back without Jaime because Cersei's unable to do anything to us. But either way, Ilyn would be in that group. Maybe he'll get ambushed in the Riverlands and something and just get killed by the BWB. But I think the BWB is a little more distracted by what they're doing with Jaime and perhaps the rescue of Jane Westerling, if not Edmure. So they've got their sights maybe set on a different Lannister group. And they don't care about Ilyn Payne. He's not a high value target for anyone. He's just a killer. Arya wants him dead. But like in terms of politics, he doesn't matter really. He's not like he doesn't control a house. He's not like leading men and he's not leading soldiers. He's not even a soldier. Cersei, of course, a huge topic in herself. Less of one for Arya, but still very important, obviously. She's on the list. Oddly, she's on the list for reasons that maybe she doesn't deserve to be. Because the main reason she's on the list is for the death of her father. But Cersei didn't want that. Cersei tried to stop Joffrey from killing Ned. But Cersei's also guilty in the sense of Micah and Lady. She pushed that more than anyone. So there's that too. Now this one, there's not much theorizing here to discuss because my headcanon is Cersei is going to die by Jaime's hand. I don't think Arya's going to have a darn thing to do with it. It won't even be related. It won't even be barely connected. So I think Cersei is just a character that Arya wants to kill but won't. I'm open to other ideas, but it's just it's foreshadowed. She's not the younger, more beautiful queen that's going to cast her down, or her little brother. It doesn't make sense. Those aren't the Valonqar. She's not the Valonqar. Yeah, so I don't think that's I don't think we need to get too deep with that. However, one of Cersei's Kingsguard, and I call her Cersei's Kingsguard because Meryn Trant pretty much does whatever Cersei wants. He killed Syrio Forel, allegedly, and certainly that's what Arya blames him for. And he was last seen guarding the Hand's apartments. The night Varys murdered Pycelle and Kevin, Meryn Trant was standing guard, effectively, clearly. He's very good at his job. He's another candidate for just someone that will die before Arya can get to him. Obviously, she killed him directly in the show, but that was the role Raff the Sweetling played in the Mercy. Those were the equivalents there. Now, this is another example. Let me say why I have a lot of doubts that she'll be at King's Landing or even in the South anytime soon. Contrary to what the show led us to believe or indicated. Me and Nina tend to agree that Arya's most likely path back to Westeros is via Justin Massey and Jane Poole, which would not involve going through the South. If Jane Poole and if Justin Massey gets what he wants, or it's time, let's say it's time for Massey to go back to the North. He's not going to go to King's Landing. He's not going to go to the South. He's going to go back to the North, where the campaign is active, where he's trying to get in Stannis' good graces to earn himself a castle. He wants to marry Asha. So why would he go to the South? And if Arya goes with them, then she's going to show back up in the North, either through White Harbor or through Eastwatch. So she won't be anywhere near the vicinity of Meryn Trant or Cersei or Ilyn Payne. Or Dunsen, so or Gregor even, or even Sandor, although there's a chance Sandor comes north, but he's not even on the list, so Sandor doesn't even matter in that regard. Now, on the other hand, let's look at the long term, the longer term. Why should we assume that all those people will be dead by the time things in the North are resolved? Let's say we go all the way through the Winds of Winter, others are defeated, but that's not going to be the end of the series. There's going to be humanity still has things to do after the others are defeated. Maybe Arya gets back to her list. She's like, you know what? That Meryn Trant's still alive. That Dunsen's still alive. Then she can go south, potentially. Maybe it's part of her epilogue. Yeah, maybe she sails west to go as an explorer. But before that, maybe she's like, well, I got some unfinished business before I sail. I got to get enough supplies, get some maps, and kill Dunsen and Sir Meryn Trant. This could be a reason. This could be the reason for her to go south, to finish her list after the threat in the North is dealt with, after the Starks have settled their business and reestablished themselves, and they're back in charge. Winterfell is restored. So, but if not, but even if that does happen, Meryn Trant is not unlikely to simply die before that. I mean, he's a Kingsguard. The regime will probably change more than once. And King's Landing, quite likely, Cersei will lose power, Aegon will gain power, then Aegon will lose power, and Daenerys will gain power. And then maybe after Daenerys, someone else, like Bran or someone else entirely. I don't know. But that's a lot of potential regime changes for one Kingsguard to survive. Maybe he gets sent north to the Wall, and then he's in Arya's clutches, or at least nearby somewhat. If there's even a wall to send people to, though. So it gets real tricky to theorize about some of these names, but it's still part of the fun, even if we can't really pin it down. So real quick, let's go through Arya's other kills, and then we'll talk about the House of Black and White and how some of these things are going to maybe come to a head. So her first kill was that Red Keep stable boy that tried to grab her and talked about how he would get rewarded by the queen for turning her in, and Arya just did what she had to do, One of Amory's men, as we said, she killed one of them for sure during the night Yoren was killed, but she may have killed more. I don't think she did, given the description, but it's possible. She obviously killed that Bolton guard when escaping Harrenhal. Now, do these count as not choosing who we kill? Because that's the many-faced god. The servants of the many-faced god don't choose who they kill. Now, these are people that she didn't aim at killing. They were just necessary deaths for the circumstance she was in. She didn't say, hey, I must kill this man. She's like, no, I need to kill this man to do what needs doing. She finished off the Sarsfield Squire at the end of the crossroads with Needle. She killed Darion, the singer / deserter, for violating the Night's Watch code, for deserting the Night's Watch. She was punished for that. It wasn't much of a punishment, though. And I think this is an interesting aspect to Arya pushing boundaries with the Faceless Men. Is like, well, what are they going to do to her? She's not afraid of death. She's afraid of being kicked out of their order. But she's less and less afraid of that the more she learns from them. The more she learns from them, the less they have to teach her. And the more she feels like she can go out and do things on her own. The next person she kills is the insurance salesman, which was an order. That's certainly not someone on her list. It was someone that they told her to kill, and she did it. She was successful with her first hit, her first sanctioned hit. Then, of course, she's been a part of kills while in her wolf dreams, which isn't, that's not her. She's not guiding Nymeria. Those aren't her kills, but she experiences it. She experiences the sensation, the senses that, her nose and her mouth and the taste of blood through her wolf. So it's another way that she relates to and connects with the process of death and killing is through her wolf dreams. The prayer and the many-faced god. So yeah, how do these things collide? Because they do collide. Let's start off with a conversation, and here's where it gets brought up directly in A Feast for Crows. Quote,
"Each night before sleep, she murmured her prayer into her pillow. Ser Gregor, it went. Dunsen, Raff the Sweetling, Ser Ilyn, Ser Meryn, Queen Cersei. She would have whispered the names of the Freys of the Crossing, too, if she had known them. One day I'll know, she told herself, and then I'll kill them all. No whisper was too faint to be heard in the house of black and white.
Child,
said the kindly man one day.
What are those names you whisper of at night?
I don't whisper any names, she said.
You lie,
he said.
It's so funny that I don't say any names. That's, only a child would say that every once in a while. As dark as Arya's story is, sometimes it's just pure comedy. That's so funny. It's like, I don't whisper names. Like, I heard you. You do it every night. Like, you're going to tell me, it's like, I don't know. It wasn't me. But obviously this list is at odds. They're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to not kill people that they want to. They're supposed to kill who they're told to kill, who the god decides, right? It's kind of BS, this whole many-faced god stuff, but still it's at odds with what they're teaching her. Not only has she not given up on her list, she's killed someone on it, after this. She's killed someone on it before it and someone after it. So yeah, 2. 1 before Braavos, she kills Raff, and we haven't seen the reaction to that yet. So this is coming, presumably in her second The Winds of Winter chapter. She knows it's going to be serious, but how serious? She's already seen how all they did the first time. The penalty was just, we're going to blind you sooner than we would have, because they were going to blind her anyway. So it's almost like she wasn't punishment. It's almost like, in a way, they advanced her training sooner. It's like, we're going to push you in your curriculum faster for cheating, for breaking the rules. We're going to teach you advanced classes sooner. It's almost like she was rewarded. So like in her mind, she should keep pushing the boundaries. And this is something she does, right? This actually does harken back to her earliest chapters, the arguing or facing Septa Mordain, right? She, as big as she is on justice and righteousness, she's got issues with authority. Whether it's Septa Mordain or her father or mother or the House of Black and White. She doesn't do what she's told a lot of the time because she values certain things more than that, right? Her sense of justice, her need for revenge, to her, that's more important than following the rules of the House of Black and White. It is important to her. She follows the rules most of the time. She cares. She wants to do well. She wants them to promote her and teach her more things. But it's just not quite as important as getting home, as being a Stark, as killing people on her list. And nothing seems to change that. Nothing seems to trump that. She's just, yep, that's how she is. She's, again, stubborn above all other things, and she is what she is, and no one's changing that. Remember, too, in Bran's coma dream in chapter 3 of A Game of Thrones, Bran 3 of A Game of Thrones, there's that line, and he saw Arya watching in silence and holding her secrets hard in her heart. Yeah, I mean, that's what she does a lot. She holds her secrets hard in her heart and eventually unleashes them when, like, she kills the tickler and she's just, all that emotion comes flooding out. Is there gold in the village? Gems. She's screaming and yelling and stabbing. That line might be more foreshadowy than George initially intended. He intended it to be foreshadowy for Arya, watching in silence and holding her secrets hard in her heart. The list is one of those secrets that she refuses to admit to. Another one being her skin-changing skill that she doesn't cop to, even to herself to a certain extent, but certainly not to the kindly man or the other servants of the many-faced god. Now, remember again, she linked the phrase Valar Morghulis, which is something Jaqen taught her, to her list, which she thinks they need to die, so it makes sense to link all men must die to a list of people that she thinks need to die. And this is, of course, at Harrenhal that she first does this. She's practicing with her broom sword. She's feeling powerful. The more she goes along, her triumphs, her killings, it builds this sense of power, of agency within her. Jaqen was recruiting her all along. But interesting to think about this. Compare Jaqen's teachings to what she's taught at the House of Black and White. Jaqen wasn't putting restrictions on her. He was like, to bring her in, to encourage her, to get her interested in joining. He didn't give her these restrictions about ethics or about, we don't choose who we kill. He didn't bring any of that up at the time. No, he's like, no, kill, I got to give you 3 deaths for the Red God. Oh, it's not me, though. It's the Red God. It's like he gives her a taste, but the reality is they're not supposed to get to kill who they want. She's not going to ever get to have 3 wishes. That's not a real situation that would ever happen as a faceless man. So it was a little, a little tricky, a little dishonest by Jaqen there. So this is how they actually view death, which is very different than, say, Jaqen, how Jaqen explains it to versus how the kindly man explains it here. Quote, I'm sorry, this isn't the kindly man. My notes say the kindly man, but this is Plagueface, one of the other servants that talks to her and gives her the mission to kill the insurance man.
Death holds no sweetness in this house. We are not warriors, nor soldiers, nor swaggering Braavos puffed up with pride. We do not kill to serve some lord, to fatten our purses, to stroke our vanity. We never give the gift to please ourselves, nor do we choose the ones we kill. We are but servants of the God of many faces.
So yeah, that's definitely at odds. Jaqen was like, which 3 people should I kill? And she got to choose. Nor do we choose the ones we kill, is what Plagueface just said here. So yeah, they're recruiting. They're a lot open more. They're not telling you the whole story when they're recruiting you, clearly. So right after this, though, comes one of my favorite exchanges. It's another comedic moment, a little break from the seriousness of all this. The kindly man follows this up and says, servants should be humble. Actually, this might still be Plagueface, but it doesn't matter. The line is, servants should be humble. And she says, I can be humbler than anyone. I can be the most humble there is, that's really funny. Yes, she's proud of how humble she can be. And yeah, so Arya's been traumatized repeatedly, but she's so hard to intimidate. Like, she is just trying to intimidate Arya, just gets her to dig her heels in more deeply and makes her just stand up straighter and want to fight back even more. No matter how bad it gets, that just fires her up. She's like, the worse it gets, the more she wants to fight back. But she also seeks the skills to protect herself. She doesn't want to feel afraid. She hates the feeling of fear. It's like those 2 things come together. When she has fear, she feels hate towards whatever's making her afraid. She hates the feeling of fear and hates those who inflict it on her. And she isn't just a mouse that takes it. She wants to learn how to stop that, to find that fear, find the source of it, and kill it. Which is, again, not in line with being a servant of the many-faced God. And her the fact that she can't be intimidated is really on display in this scene too. She ate that worm, the skull worm. This Plagueface guy, his face is horrifying. It's like dripping, he's literally dripping blood. It's weeping sores, and it means nothing to her. She doesn't care at all. And she's challenging these authority figures. She's not afraid of them, even though these are the most talented killers in the world, literally, and she's just not afraid of them. She's more afraid of them kicking her out than of them like killing her or something. So yeah, just confident, understands basically the way they act, they operate, and this could really bring things to a head later when she eventually has a falling out with them, which we kind of assume is coming. Now, remember that one of her acts of defiance here, if I get back briefly to her resistance to authority, which is a big part of her character, I want to use Needle as an example again. She hid Needle from the Faceless Men rather than get rid of it. Something we're all well aware of. It's one of the most blatant symbols of her refusing to part with her identity. She also hid Needle from her father, though, right? She just didn't, this is just on a simpler level. It's just, she likes her sword and wants to keep it and knows that her father would take it away from her. But it is an interesting little connection to draw there. She doesn't know, there's rules she agrees with and rules she doesn't, and as much as she again, resistance to authority. She's the least tame of the wolves. She is a wolf at heart. She has the temper of a wolf. She has the savagery of a wolf. It isn't there all the time, but it's in her. And and she's the hardest to tame. I think I wanted to think of a different synonym there, but no, I think tame is the right word, because it came up last week in our Stark Skin Changers episode where Varamir said, a wolf, being a warg is like a marriage. You don't own the wolf and the wolf doesn't own you. You're part of it and it's part of you. And very much this as well. Arya is part Nymeria. Nymeria is part her. And beyond that, she's very much Stark. She has a lot of her father and mother and other Starks. She has qualities that we associate with Starks. So this is all very interesting next to her dedication to a sense of justice. It is very human, this inequality. These two things don't line up very well. Like, how do you have such a sense of justice, but you also have a resistance to authority? Because those two things can't exist without each other. You can't have justice without authority, because you can't punish bad guys or lawbreakers if they won't accept their sentences. You have to be stronger than the people who are having justice done to them, because otherwise they won't adhere to the sentences, right? She's like, no, okay, I'm guilty. Well, make me do jail time. If the authorities aren't strong enough, then the justice it doesn't exist. But her identity, her prayer, again, it's so stubborn, she will not release it. She just can't release it. Quote, "You lie. I can see the truth in your eyes. You have the eyes of a wolf and a taste for blood."
Sir Gregor, she could not help but think. Dunsen, Raff the Sweetling, Sir Ilyn, Sir Meryn, Queen Cersei. If she spoke, she would need to lie, and he would know. She kept silent.
How telling is that? He accuses her of, you have the eyes of a wolf and a taste for blood, and the list pops up in her mind. She's like, yep, you're right. It's like, yep, if I speak at all, he'll be able to know I'm lying. She knows how the lying game works. The best way to win the lying game is to not play. Sometimes. Well, she can't win, so she just doesn't play. She's like, well, I can't lose. I can't win, but I won't lose by saying nothing. So Raff is on the list because this is obviously before she kills Raff, but she kills him, shortly after this. Because presumably Mercy is the first chapter of the Winds of Winter that Arya has, and this is her last chapter of Dance with Dragons. So we talked about how Needle and her skin changing ability is her anchor, part of her anchor to her Stark identity. This is too, because it's personal. The names on her list are mostly about things done to her or her family. They were done to Arya's family. They weren't done to no one's family. If she wasn't Arya, the list wouldn't matter to her anymore, because these were things that happened to somebody else. She's got nothing to do with any of that. But of course not. She remembers all of it. She remembers it well. It pops up even when she's being told that she's not adhering, because she's not adhering. She's not no one. It's not working. She is not losing her identity. If anything, she's becoming more Arya. And Mercy chapter proves that. The second she was exposed to her history, to her former self, that's what she did. She jumped into it gleefully and without hesitation. But here's how she reflects on death. Here's a really interesting moment. This is the last time she says the list or thinks about death. This is her last Dance with Dragons chapter. Because remember, she doesn't actually repeat the list in the Mercy chapter. Quote,
"Sleep did not come easily that night. Tangled in her blankets, she twisted this way and that in the cold, dark room, but whichever way she turned, she saw the faces. They have no eyes, but they can see me. She saw her father's face upon the wall. Beside him hung her lady mother, and below them her 3 brothers, all in a row. No, that was some other girl. I am no one, and my only brothers wear robes of black and white. Yet, there was the black singer, there the stable boy she'd killed with needle, there the pimply squire from the Crossroads Inn, and over there the guard whose throat she'd slashed to get them out of Harrenhal. The tickler hung on the wall as well, the black holes that were his eyes swimming with malice. The sight of him brought back the feel of the dagger in her hand as she had plunged it into his back again and again and again.
Some context is important here. Some of y'all may have figured this out already, but this is, of course, right after she's seen the room with all the faces in it. All the thousands of skinned faces that the Faceless Men have in their secret chamber below. The one that people think the Boltons have, which, well, maybe they have one too. But this we've now seen and can confirm exists, and it's pretty scary. So you can see even Arya is a little intimidated by this. She's imagining the people she killed as faces on those platforms, on those pillars. And by the way, y'all, that room is scarier than just all the faces. I mean, at one point there's a tunnel with the columns that are holding the tunnel up are skulls, like just actual skulls. Like, it's super dark. It's meant, I think, to parallel Bran's cave that he's in, which is also filled with skulls, but the skulls aren't like part of the construction. They're just lying around here and there, the way nature would leave things. So it's like the supernatural elements of death in both of them, but one is building on those elements and the other is existing among those elements. Pretty cool, pretty creepy, and a lot we could say about that. So this is, of course, a mix of emotions. There's a little bit of fear. There's some side effect of the magic. There's some guilt. She's put the other face on already. She's already got the ugly girl's face on. So there's also like someone else's memories are in there, and that's messing with her a bit too. So there's definitely magic happening, and maybe some side effects are going on. She goes off to kill the insurance salesman with this new disguise shortly after this. But she recites the prayer that one last time before heading out. So she says this and then recites the prayer, pretty much just as we had it a minute ago that Ashea read. And then that's the end of the book, or at least her part of it. And then, of course, we have Mercy. So she's still very much in the midst of it. She's still dealing with the list. She's still being told not to do it and doesn't really seem to have an effect. She's like, yeah, no, I'm going to still do it. And if I see somebody on the list, I'm going to kill them, as we saw with Raff. So unless something about her attitude or personality changes, it's going to keep happening. Arya's going to continue to add and maybe subtract. And, well, she's definitely going to keep subtracting from the list, whether she takes the names off herself. People are going to die who are on that list. And she probably will add to it. I mean, she already said she would add the names of House Frey if she knew them. So in terms of the future of the list, let's start with that, House Frey. She knows they're responsible. Recall this line that Ashea quoted earlier. She would have whispered the names of the Freys at the crossing too, if she had known them. One day I'll know, she told herself, and then I'll kill them all. Them all? I mean, that is what happened on the show. It seems a bit far-fetched to me for that to happen because there's a lot of Freys. I mean, damn. And get in line, Arya. Kind of like Amory Lorch. There's a lot of people the Freys want. A lot of people want Freys dead. So yeah, since it happened on TV, it's tempting to see it happening in the books. But I'm definitely not jumping to that conclusion. I'm not even, and Nina agrees here. I'm not even sure she'll kill a single Frey, because again, if she goes back to the north through White Harbor or Eastwatch, she won't even be in the south. Where are these Freys that she will be killing? There's a couple of them in the north, but those might not even be alive by the time she gets there. Stannis may have dealt with them by then. They may be buried under frozen lake by the time she gets there. And other Freys, who knows? I mean, the BWB, the things happening down there, the Blackfish is alive. Yeah, the Freys may be quite dealt with by the time Arya even has a chance. So I absolutely acknowledge it's a possibility that she may deal with some Freys. But I'm very skeptical she'll kill them all. Certainly not by herself. But hey, can't say it's impossible either. It could be another example of what I was saying earlier, that maybe she will go south later, after the others are defeated, after the Starks kind of sort everything out. She's like, okay, now I can go get my revenge on some Freys. She already hated Elmar Frey. Remember that hilarious line where he's like, we've been betrayed. I won't be marrying that princess. And Arya's like, I hope your princess dies. Now, though a lot of you already get this joke, the princess in question was Arya. Arya and Elmar were supposed to marry each other, and neither of them ever knew it. But at that point, the Freys were still on Robb's side. Well, they actually had just gotten the news that they weren't. But Arya didn't know that, Arya didn't know that they'd split. So a very dark twist would be Arya killing the wrong Frey, like Perwyn or Olyvar, because those are good Freys. Perwyn was one of the ones they didn't allow to be at the Red Wedding because they knew they couldn't trust him. Olyvar was Robb's squire. Olyvar loved Robb. So we never know what happened. We haven't found out what happened to Perwyn or Olyvar, if they just disavowed their family or if they're just going along with it. Or yeah, we have no follow-up on them, but it could happen one day. Yeah, that would be a really dark thing if Arya killed one of them, just assuming they were involved. And in fact, no, they were a good guy. So that could be a big source of conflict there. As for the Boltons, they are just as culpable, or maybe slightly less culpable, for the Red Wedding. But she doesn't even know, which, again, I pointed that out earlier. It's almost funny that Roose Bolton decided to betray the Starks right in front of Arya, but she didn't realize it. And she still doesn't know. But I think she will learn, because it's become common knowledge that the Boltons were part of that. But I suspect Roose and Ramsay will be dead by the time she has a chance to deal with them. That plot is unfolding now, and she's still in Braavos. So I feel like by the time she gets back to Westeros, they'll probably already be dealt with. But if not, they get added to the list for sure. Or one of them does, if one of them's dead and the other one isn't. And again, the same goes for the Lannisters involved in the Red Wedding. She doesn't fully understand their involvement, but Cersei's already on her list, and Tywin's already dead. And well, what about Jaime? Does she think about Jaime? Jaime's not on her list. We know Cersei's probably going to die to Jaime, but is Jaime going to die at the same time? That's less sure. Will Arya be glad when she finds out Cersei is dead, or will she be wishing that she did it herself? Will she find it poignant that Jaime killed her, if that's what happens, if she learns that's what happened? A lot of possibilities there, and the similar possibilities with her killing Lannisters that have nothing to do with anything just because they're Lannisters. But a lot could change in that regard. What if Jaime goes north and tries to help, fight the others? Would that be a reason to forgive him or to delay it? Maybe she'll never care about killing Jaime. I mean, I think about him a lot in this regard, because in Bran's Coma-Vision, let's go back to that. Remember that Bran perceives a hound's helm and a man in sunburst armor, glowing golden like the sun, with a huge giant with black blood coming out of his visor standing behind them. That's obviously Sandor, Jaime, and Gregor, right? Arya's already had pretty distinct arcs with both the Hound and Sir Gregor, but what does Jaime have to do with her? So it seems like Bran's dream indicates Arya and Jaime are going to have a storyline, but that hasn't happened yet. So maybe this is where that will come up. Something to do with her list, her revenge against Lannisters, something to do with the Riverlands and how he's handling that. I don't know. It's difficult to figure that out, but given Bran's dream, I think something might be happening. Maybe this is an abandoned idea by George, something he had in mind that he said, nah, actually, never mind. And it may have more to do with Sansa than Arya, because in that dream, it's both Sansa and Arya that are framed as part of this particular image. Which brings us to Littlefinger, because we've discussed how he is behind several of the things that she's condemned. Like, she's mad about her father being killed, but she doesn't know Littlefinger had anything to do with that. She's probably wouldn't be too happy to know about Lysa and how Littlefinger treated Jane Poole and her sister, Sansa. I mean, not Jane Poole's sister, Arya's sister. So, again, I would say that Littlefinger is Sansa's villain to deal with, but there's nothing stopping Arya from being involved in that, from Arya helping. Maybe he gets put on the list just in time before, but I think more likely Arya does something about Littlefinger, helps about it without ever maybe putting him on the list, because it's not like she yearns for his death. When she finds out what he's guilty of, maybe he'll get a place on the list, but it might not play out that way. It might just be, hey, I'm going to kill this guy. We're going to do this. My favorite idea of one of her murders that's kind of tinfoily is Varys. I've been on this train for a while. The Arya kills Varys train. And it harkens back to her overhearing Varys and Illyrio down in the tunnels. A lot of those elements have come back around. She's learned how to navigate in darkness, both through not being able to see, both through being trained as a blind person, and by using cats to skin change into, which is what drew her into that tunnel beneath the Red Keep in the first place, chasing the cat. If she were able to return to those tunnels, she would be able to navigate them extremely well, given everything she's learned. She's also outdone Varys in a major way, which is that he's a mummer. He's an expert mummer. And now she has that. But she's better than he is because of these other factors, because of the magic, because of the skin changing, and because of the faceless man training. He can't match that. So she's mastering his game. Not the political intrigue, of course, but the stuff that he does in the tunnels and the secrets in the doors and the all the sneaking around and the disguises. He's just better than her. She's just better than him in all these things. And given how she detected him, how she encountered him very early on in the story and overheard what he was saying, wasn't able to process it. But the things he's doing to the little birds, he's got child slaves. What an awful thing. If that ever comes out, if Arya learns of that, oh man, top of the list. Or at least she'll want to get him. That's a horrible thing, right? So it's very possible. Qyburn in the same light. Well, since Qyburn is the current master worshippers, maybe he needs to be put down. I kind of feel like that's going to go a different direction. It won't be Arya, but hey, it's another possibility. The man responsible for bringing the Mountain back, that would be a reason for her to want him dead. She wants the Mountain dead for all the things he did. He resurrected that guy, and then the Mountain killed more people, continued to be evil. Like, that's a good reason to kill Qyburn. Among other things, he worked for the Bloody Mummers. I mean, that's Vargo Hoat's people. He was pretty bad. So yeah, I can see why Arya might put him on the list. How might Arya interact with Aegon VI regime? Possibly not at all. I mean, potentially Varys. I just pointed Varys out, but he's one potential character that could be involved. I wonder, maybe Illyrio. Could she kill Illyrio? That'd be kind of weird, but not too weird. Some other things would have to happen before that, but it's possible, right? I mean, I think mostly Aegon VI regime, that plotline will play out while she's in the north and they won't have a whole lot to do with each other, but you can't be too sure about these things. What about Jon becoming king in the north? If that happens and Arya's in the north at the time of that, during that or when it begins, during any of that, really, will Arya go after Jon's political enemies? That's an interesting thing she could do for him, for her family, is people don't want Jon to be in charge. They think he's a bastard. They don't think he deserves to be king in the north. Will she be one of his, I don't want to say his assassins. Jon wouldn't really condone that, but that doesn't mean that she won't do it. So, what about Jon's murderers among the Night's Watch? That's probably something that gets handled internally, but that's yet another thing that Arya could have thoughts on, even if she doesn't take action. Could Arya return to the list after House Stark is at peace again? That's something I've touched on a few times in this episode, and it's one of my closing thoughts. I want to reference that one more time. Will she give it up, though, as a relic of her youth? That's another possibility. And she gets a little older. She realizes that this is not ideal for her, that revenge isn't what she wants to be all about. I mean, she's had so many shifts of identity. She's very used to that. It could happen again, something that changes her perspective on death and killing. And maybe she goes through all this and comes out the other side and is like, well, maybe I don't want to be a killer anymore. Another group that she's got a history with is the Brotherhood Without Banners. I don't think she has too much ill will towards them. She didn't love being captured by them. She didn't love being held by them, but I don't think she looks on them as villains or murderers, even though she's unhappy with how the Sandor Clegane trial by combat played out. I don't think she's going to blame Beric Dondarrion for that. I mean, she can't. He's dead. And he passed his life force on to Catelyn, which, by the way, that could be a strange thing if she ever finds that out. Like, you have my mom's walking around as an undead person because of Beric? Okay. Like, how is she going to process that? Will she ever meet any of the BWB again? Will she ever meet Thoros, for example, who is still with them? You know, meeting her mother again, that's a whole other thing. I mean, wow, I don't know. I would no idea how that could go. But what about like Tom O'Sevens? And like he's still fighting the Freys and the Lannisters. He's still in the Riverlands dealing with them. He's still working against them. She'd like that. Anguy and Edric Dane. She knows them. They aren't part of the BWB anymore. They left. What if she encounters them at some point? That'd be interesting. They know each other. What would they have to say to each other after all this time? Ned Dane, you know, the guy with the kid with her father's name. She kind of liked him and he kind of liked her. I don't mean like they had a crush on each other, although maybe they did. I don't think that's the way it was framed, but they got along, you know. They had their little meeting and seemed to enjoy each other's company, basically. You know, they seem to respect each other at least as much as children can, young people like that. So yeah. And as our final thought about Lady Stoneheart, how does that impact her notion of death? Does this change her concept of death even more? Like, is it truly the gift of mercy if this is a potential result? It's like it's not final. Death isn't the end if you come back as something lesser, but still as part of what you were. What a strange thing to have to process. What a strange thing to think about. And it's going to be in a lot of characters' minds when you have the others resurrecting people and then Melisandre resurrecting people and Thoros resurrecting people, her mother dead then alive, Gregor Clegane walking around. You have like all these different forms of resurrection. And so if even death loses its power, the Valorist priests in Volantis are all, the endless summer will come and even death will be defeated. Like, no one will die? I mean, all these things are really interesting to consider in terms of the large-scale arcs playing out, and how Arya will fit into these is really unique, I think. Her place amongst all this is unlike anyone else's because she straddles a lot of these plot lines in ways that nobody else does. No one is connected to the House of Black and White other than her, really, amongst major characters. And no one has this intimate relationship with death quite like she does. It's perhaps the most unique. Our trivia question was, how many on the list has Arya personally killed? Just 2. She's killed 8 people. 2 of them were on her list. Raff the Sweetling, and the Tickler. I would guess she's not done. Certainly she won't cross them all off herself, but more to come. Curious to hear from you all on which names you think she'll cross off personally and which ones will get crossed off by someone else. Like, I think Cersei is an easy guess that won't be her, but some of the other ones a little trickier, like Dunsen. So, and then Sir Ilyn. Yeah. So I want to hear from you all on which names you think are the most likely. It'd be a good way to weigh in, and we'll maybe discuss that at a later date. If you all have any theories, we'll do a mailbag episode at some point in the near future and come back and take your comments on past episodes. It's something we do from time to time. But in the meantime, that does it for today. Certainly check out our Skin Changers of House Stark episode if you haven't already. And our Valar Morghulis chapters on Arya. You can listen to just the Arya chapters if you're a patron or a Spotify subscriber. We take our Valar Morghulis episodes and edit them so that you can listen to just one POV. And not all the POVs are done. We haven't edited them all yet, but Arya is one of the ones that is done, if I remember correctly.
They're all higher quality.
And they've all been, they've also been, since we recorded Valar Morghulis, the technology available to us for editing has improved. So Shea went back and fixed a lot of those old ones. So the patron versions of Valar Morghulis character by character only are higher quality than the original Valar Morghulis episodes by a pretty notable amount.
But yeah, we have done all of Arya, but we haven't completely remastered all of Arya because that was I compiled them in one phase and then we upgraded some of our audio editing capabilities later. So now I'm going back through and running them. So anyways, they're constantly getting better. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a thing that we quote unquote deal with here on our end is technology and podcasting, especially the last 2 to 3 years, is rapidly accelerated. The tools we have to make our show better are becoming a lot more common, a lot more affordable, a lot more higher quality.
Yeah, I wonder
and
if
that can
anyone
apply to our past episodes.
I wonder if anyone has noticed that the last few months, if our audio on podcast side has been improved. If you can tell a difference, leave us a review and tell us.
Yeah, good time for that. And we'd appreciate any thoughts you have on that. And if anything, certainly criticisms, we are certainly happy to accept those as well, if they're made in good faith.
I wouldn't call myself happy to accept those, willing to accept
Willing,
them.
okay, willing. Tough but fair. I tend to agree. I don't love criticism. Give it to me. I want to be told I'm wrong. I want to be told I'm bad. You're bad and you should feel bad. Thank you, Zoidberg. And with that, we'll sign off. Until next time, my friends, my fellow historians, you know what to do. Valar Rereadus.